Hello and welcome to RPG Unlimited, a podcast about tabletop role-playing games. My name is Emra, and I'll be interviewing players, DMs, game masters, artists, developers, content creators for their unique views and processes when they play and or create tabletop role-playing games and content. Today we are talking with Rich Howard, one of the creators behind Descent into Midnight, an aquatic kind of psychological RPG game, and co-creator of Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. You can find more info at descentintomidnight.com and crashingthemode.com, as well as you can support them at Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/M4M1MSMD. Also, I believe that is Mastermind. Just about, right? No, that's not even... No, never mind. Ignore the Mastermind bit. It kind of read as Mastermind to me for a second. So, hopefully they do vanity links where we can do stuff that makes sense at some point, because that's madness. So, how are you doing today? Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Projects during the day today. And then taking care of the kids and trying to get them into bed so we can do this. Being a father on top of everything else.
Did you hit start on the captions?
I think so. Let's see. Let's see what happened with my captions. Looks like my captions are disappeared. Hold on.
Okay.
We're going to get these captions up first. Try that.
There you go. Yep, they're on.
Perfect. I think the whole thing just closed out for some reason. Yeah, so I am, amongst many things, a game designer and podcaster. As you mentioned, so I'm one of the co-designers of Descent into Midnight, which you already had, I know, Taylor Labreche on as well, who's one of the other designers. Mm-hmm. I have a degree in marine biology from way back in the day, and I decided to turn that into using it for role-playing games, since I was not using it for marine biology anymore. So,
marine biology, also known as the study of Earth's actual aliens.
Exactly, and that's the point. Yeah. So I got my marine biology degree back in the early 90s. I approached biology from a different perspective and went into the veterinary field. I was actually a veterinary nurse and did wildlife rehab and worked for zoos and aquariums around the world for about a decade. And then moved into San Diego, where I live now, and then worked here at some clinics here. Had my own business for a while. Went back to school. I have a degree in nursing. So I've been a nurse for the last 10 years doing critical care and hospice work, which has been fantastic. It's given me, I work 3 12-hour shifts a week, which is long days, but it gives me plenty of time off to be able to do other projects. And so I took that marine biology degree quite a few years ago now and decided to write a column. Talking about the use of aquatic animals and aquatic settings for adventures, for novels or role-playing games or anything else.
Okay. It's really, really cool. How'd you get into studying marine biology?
Well, that's a story. I grew up in Kentucky, small town in Kentucky. When I was a sophomore in high school, I read this article about a professor named Ken Norris, who was in California and had taught at UC Santa Cruz. And he was one of the grandfather of marine mammal natural history. And they were talking about studying marine mammals in particular is very difficult to do. If you're following them in a boat, right, and you see a pod of dolphins, you introduce a boat with divers, their behavior is going to change, right? You're not going to be able to get an idea of what they do normally in the wild. Well, Ken Norris and his researchers had found a pod of spinner dolphins that returned to the same cove in Hawaii at night to sleep. And so they basically set up the equivalent of blinds, like a hunter would or whatnot, out in this cove, and they were able to study the behavior naturally, which is unusual. But what they were finding was bonkers, including this is the first hint that dolphins sleep one hemisphere of the brain at a time. So they can never be fully asleep like us. They can never fully go unconscious out in the water. They need to be aware of the surroundings at all time. So they sleep just one half of their brain while the other half of their brain stays awake.
Well, yeah, because they're a prey creature and B, a mammal in water.
Right, exactly. And this water it's constantly moving. They have to be aware of what's going on around them. It's a 3D environment, or they'll end up running into something or whatnot. They don't have the luxury that we have of curling up in a bed, lock the doors, and go completely unconscious. So even though they're entirely mammals, just like us, and they have the same needs and requirements just like us, they had environmental pressures that changed what they could do. It completely changed how we even view what sleep is and what it does. And so in reading this article and understanding this and starting to study more about dive physiology and how that works, I was starting to understand how these creatures are they're exactly like humans and also entirely alien. And I just had to know more. It turned out that after I graduated high school, my father was looking for a new job, and he got several offers around the States. He ended up taking one in California. So I came to Southern California. I went to community college for a few years and then transferred to UC Santa Cruz, where Ken Norris had been teaching. Unfortunately, he retired the quarter before I got there, but I actually did get to meet him. And we spent a lot of time talking, and then he invited me up to his ranch, and I went up to his ranch and had lunch with him and his wife and had a really long, incredible conversation with him. He was brilliant, man. This was back in the 90s. He's passed away since then, unfortunately, but it was incredible. Unfortunately, studying marine mammals as a PhD in sleep physiology and bioacoustics in particular, which was what my interest was in, is extremely difficult to do. There's basically one person in the United States in Alaska that was studying it, and I was going to have to wait 5 or 6 years before I could even enter into a PhD program with him, and I was going to have to provide all my own money. So I had to decide, what am I going to do something else. So I ended up working at a veterinary hospital and doing veterinary emergency work, and working with one of the, since I was in Santa Cruz, Monterey is very close by. So I ended up working with one of the veterinarians that was one of the main veterinarians for the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And so I got to use the marine biology degree and kind of the veterinary sciences that I was studying as well together to do some just incredible things. And then I took that and took some time off and traveled around the world. I worked at aquariums in Two Oceans Aquarium in South Africa. I worked did volunteer work in Africa, in Australia, in New Zealand. Worked with a lot of range of different animals. It was pretty amazing. And then I came to the States and took a job here in San Diego at a day clinic, and then started moving on to doing other things, because veterinary sciences is fantastic. Being a veterinary nurse is amazing. Doesn't pay great and no benefits. So I had to find something else to do, even though I loved it so much. So I moved into actually holistic health, had my own business in holistic health for about a decade, and then decided to kind of combine the Eastern and Western medicine, kind of the spiritual and the intellectual together. Went back to school, got another bachelor's degree, this time in nursing. And then went into the ICU here at UCSD Medical Center and worked there for quite a bit. And now I do home hospice. So I go to different people's homes and help them with their families as they pass away. And it's a very satisfying job. I love that job. It also gives me plenty of time and, the pay and the benefits to be able to put some effort into both my family and to some of these other projects that I want to do.
Well, yeah, because hospice care isn't easy, especially if it's a person who it's a little bit longer than expected with their state of health. I've experienced that. So
yeah, it can be up and down. And having worked in the ICU with people at end of life as well, it's kind of nice to be in the hospice arena, in which we're not having to make some very challenging decisions in the ICU. So now I'm kind of out after those decisions are made, and I'm able to help the family and help the patient, and it's very, very satisfying. But again, like being able to do this, being able to do Whelmed, be able to do work on Descent to Midnight, work on the other projects that I'm working on, allows me this rest time to be able to put all the energy I need to into my patients and take plenty of time off to get lots of other creative and intellectual and spiritual things, satisfied, so I can go back and make sure I'm giving them the best I can. Yeah.
And that's actually kind of special, because most people can't work out that kind of schedule. Just the nature of most people's work just doesn't allow it.
Tough.
So
I mean, we have 186 episodes of Whelmed, and almost 60 of those now, I think, are discussion episodes where we have guests on and do interviews on various creative topics. just scheduling recording for that, much less all the actual plays and role-playing game podcasts I've been on, just scheduling those is tough because the weekends I'm either working or I'm with my family. And so it's usually during the weekdays, middle of a weekday where most of the people are working when I'm free. So it's tough to schedule. Like even just scheduling tonight was a challenge. So I'm glad we could get it worked out. But
yeah. Well, and like I said, hopefully, far as scheduling interviews, that's something I'll be changing with the next school year, because part of that for me is not so much work as it is parenting.
Yep.
Because I am stay at home, I do everything on a very shoestring budget.
I hear you. Yeah, my wife's a teacher, so she works Monday through Friday during the weekdays, and so it's just trying to juggle everything we can. Right now, I think one of my daughter's still not quite asleep yet, so my wife's actually stepping up and helping getting her down tonight, which is fantastic. Awesome. Yeah, so that's a little bit about my background, at least kind of the eclectic background that I come from that I'm bringing into the industry. But I didn't start doing professional game design stuff until I want to say 7 years ago, I think. And I'm 49 this year, next week, actually. So I was in my 40s. I started gaming when I was 7. So back in 1977 was the first time I ever played a role-playing game, which was D&D in 77. There wasn't much else besides that. But my older brother was playing. And he was quite a bit older than I was. So my mom used to make him take me to his friend's house when he was playing D&D, and he was 16 and I was like 7.
Oh no!
Yeah, so
horrible.
They had this.
Take the little brother to D&D.
But I was such a good little brother.
Look what they did to you.
I know. So what they did, they had his friend Scott had this pinball machine that they had rigged to be quarterless. And so I just played this pinball machine all the time. But like eventually I wanted to see what was going on. And so they let me sit at the table. But they wanted to give me something that couldn't hurt anybody else. So it was like a first level elf wizard with a 1 sleep spell. This is back in first edition where, it's just, I was a 1-shot magic item basically with 2 hit points. And I just wanted to get in, can I cast my spell now? And they're like, no. Eventually I remember very distinctly, they like kicked this door in and there were 16 goblins in this room. And I was like, can I cast my spell now? And they're like, oh, what? Actually, yeah, that's a good time to cast the spell. And I rolled 2d8 and I rolled 2 8s for 16 hit dice, and all 16 goblins went to sleep. And all of these guys who were like 16, 17 years old were like on their feet, like, yeah, screaming. And I was like, yeah, I did this thing. I was like, I want to do this forever. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so then eventually down the line, my dad got me the basic set, and then Champions came out. I was a huge superhero fan, obviously, with Whelmed. The Young Justice Files is all focused on DC Comics related stuff. And I was a huge comics fan. So Champions, the role-playing game, came out in 83. And I bought that with my allowance and played the heck out of that too. So way back in the day. So that's kind of like my origin story on that front. But I didn't start doing anything professional until so many years later. So the modern age has made it very easy, much easier than it ever was when I was younger to get something done. Right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, and just the ability to share information at a level that we couldn't earlier makes it just.
Yeah. Well, Whelmed, my co-host for the first season, Caleb, he lives in Ohio. We've known each other for at least 5 years, 6 years. We have never met in person. We worked on an entire podcast together. We have worked on multiple projects. I've guested on. He's one of the co-hosts and founders of the RPG Academy Network as well. And I've been on there. We've never met in person. We've never been to a Gen Con together or another convention together. It's crazy that we were able to do that. Or even the fact that I was on Tribality or on these podcasts is entirely because of social media and the modern net. This would never have happened when I was younger.
Oh yeah. I can't say I've met anyone in person either. I've never been to a con.
Oh, well, actually Gen Con's the only one that I had been to, and I went there the first time, I think was 5 years ago or something, 5 or 6 years ago. And I was like, I guess I should probably go. And it's like a couple of hours from where I grew up, and I never went anywhere near there. I'd go to San Diego Comic-Con, which is bonkers. Basically, Gen Con is Comic-Con, but just for gaming.
Yeah.
San Diego Comic-Con is crazy. But yeah, so I decided to go to Gen Con one year, but nobody knew who I was. But I'd started listening to podcasts, and I think I was writing the columns for Tribality, but I think I was at that point. And so I guess people knew some of my writing, but I decided to go, and I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run a game. I'm going to make a scenario, and I'm going to run a game, and I'm going to invite all these podcasters that I've listened to and say, hey, I'm going to run a game. If you have time, why don't you come in and take a load off and let somebody else run the game for you and come join us? And I figured there's no harm in asking. Mm-hmm. Turns out a whole bunch of people said yes. Yep. I was like, okay, great, thanks. So I ended up meeting James and Kat from the One Shot Podcast Network. Jim McClure, who's on there now, hadn't even started his podcast Talking Tabletop yet. And after I ran that game for him, he asked me to be his first interview subject for his Talking Tabletop game or podcast, which is an incredible interview show. So none of those opportunities would have happened if I hadn't have just asked and just said, hey, can I do something kind for you guys? Because you guys bring me so much entertainment. And so many people ended up saying yes. It was great. But Gen Con's a little mind blowing. Even having gone to Comic-Con, I thought I was going to be an expert, and it's hard to process how much gaming is going on at that place at any one time.
I can try to imagine. I can't say that I know, because again, I haven't.
You think you can? You cannot.
Yeah.
It's like the Grand Canyon. You can't process it until you show up there, and then you still can't process it.
Yeah. The size, yeah.
But there's upsides and downsides. It's a big con, and lots of people are there, so you get to see a lot of your friends. But there's some advantages to other cons, like AcadaCon that the RPG Academy Network does. It's a smaller con, but it brings a lot of people from the industry there, and it's a real intimate con. I'd really like to go check that out. Or I heard Big Bad Con is really good, so I hear a lot of good things about that too. So there's a lot of other ones I want to check out. I can really only do like one con a year though, aside from Comic-Con. So
I know
you gotta aim it in the right direction.
I know far as what's planned, first one I'm gonna be going to, and I'm going as a panelist. Like, I don't even get to go as just a person going before I go.
Feed first, just dive in.
It's just like everything else.
Right, exactly.
Is Evil Expo. I was a little confused at the time, but at the same time, it's like, well, I mean, every time I do a personality test, I come up as a villain. Maybe there's something I don't know. So sitting back and thinking about villain mindsets, I realized, holy shit, I am a villain. I don't mean to be. I'm one of those accidental ones. I mean well. I do, but thought process, okay.
So you're going to the right con, apparently.
Yeah, I accept my fate.
Nice.
So,
nice.
So yeah, that's exciting. I can't wait to experience that, because I know that's something that really kind of changes how things, experiences. It's great to meet people face to face. Yeah,
it's pretty. Yeah, it's led to a lot of amazing things that I did not expect. I remember very literally before I started even doing the stuff on I had been.
Mm-hmm.
Ellsworth, who is one of the founders of kind of a conglomerate of writers for gaming stuff, was coming over to my website somehow. He found me and started using my stuff for his pirate campaign. And then eventually he was like, hey, do you want to do a guest post? And I was all sure. So I wrote a post called A Writer's Guide to Role Playing. And it was talking about things that you can do to become a kind of a better player at the table. Everybody does a lot of RPG, like game mastering advice, which I think is critical and very important. But we don't talk about playing as much. It's kind of a hard topic. People are like, I just want to play the way I want to play, kind of a thing. It's like, well, there's some things you can do to be aware of the people at the table and that it's a group thing. So I wrote this article and it ended up going viral. I think it's still to this day the biggest article I've ever written. And so it blew up. And so Sean was like, so you want to keep writing for us? I was like, sure. So I started 2 columns. One was called The Game Room, which is general role-playing game advice. And another one was called From the Depths. And they were both weekly. So I had 2 columns a week for at least a year there. So probably 100+ articles. And From the Depths was specifically talking about aquatic gaming. I have multiple campaign outlines for entirely aquatic campaigns. So campaigns that start with civilization that never deal with the surface at all. So these are completely underwater races and civilizations, and how to run adventures underwater in the same way that people are like, oh, I'll go into space, but I'm not going underwater because that's freaky and weird, and I don't know anything about that. But I'll go into space. Okay. I'm like, okay, let me show you how easy, right? I'm like, let me show you how easy this is and what's interesting about that. And it started out being a great platform. But I remember before I even started doing any of that, just sitting in front of a computer with a blank screen thinking like, what can I possibly add to this industry that has changed my life so much and brought me so much joy? Like, how am I supposed to compete with, I don't know, these people that have been like Shauna Germain or Monty Cook, or like, I mean, how am I supposed to compete with these people, right? Wolfgang Bauer, these people have been around for decades, Robin Laws. What am I going to add? And I was like, well, this is interesting to me and I don't see too many people doing this. So maybe I'll try this. And so I did it. And then one thing ended up leading to another. And I ended up guesting on the Dungeon Masters Block podcast for like a 2-hour thing talking about aquatic stuff. And that kind of blew up as well. So that's kind of where my in came from. And although I do writing and creative stuff in a wide range of game systems and, genres, the one I'm most known for right now, which I'm perfectly happy with, is aquatic gaming stuff, which is kind of what led into Descent into Midnight.
Right. Well, and it's kind of my understanding that when it comes to the stuff that's well written, it's written by people that are passionate about the subjects. And I mean, again, aquatic biology, stuff like that, it is pretty niche, and you don't hear as much interest about it as you did say about the space program, especially 20 years and further back years ago, where it was much more active here. So
yeah, I tell you, it's made my job pretty easy because there's crazy stuff down there and it's awesome. So it's real easy to go onto a podcast and drop bombs like, oh yeah, have you ever heard of an underwater lake? And people are like, that doesn't even make any sense. I'm like, they exist because there are substances that like even just salt that concentrates in certain areas of water, and that becomes heavier because it's got heavier solutes in it, and it drops to the bottom and it fills up little holes, little pits. And so you're swimming along underwater, or you are got a ROV and you're underwater, and you see literally what looks like Bikini Bottom for SpongeBob, a little lake underneath there. But these lakes I call them these crazy lakes of life and death, because there's all this life around the outside of the lake, because there's a lot of chemosynthesis. So these little bacteria eat things from the edge of the lake, and then things eat the bacteria. And then, you have bivalves and clams that eat those, and then other animals come in. The thing is, the lake is so toxic because it's usually concentrations of salt. So these animals will go into the lake thinking that there's food in there or whatever. And their nervous system shuts down because of all the sodium that's in that. And then they just lay down there. And it's like that swamp from Lord of the Rings. Like, there's no bacteria inside the lake, so it doesn't break down. So you're just talking about this thing that just exists in the real world, and people think it sounds fantastic. It's like fantasy. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty easy to convert some of that stuff, or to even just present it. You don't even need to make game stats about that. Just presenting the idea of that, and then telling your players, actually, that's real. Like, you can literally just go see that.
Yeah.
and blow their minds. It's amazing.
I mean, and then that always throws out. I don't know if anyone's thrown an idea out. I know it's something I don't think I would have thought of otherwise, because I'm personally not a fan of the cartoon. But a SpongeBob RPG would be fairly simple to write when you know stuff like that, because it's like, no, this is a thing. I mean, even if it wasn't, it's fantasy. We could make what we want happen. But if you want someone that's like, well, no, that can't happen. No, actually, here it is.
Actually, it can. It's weird, yes, but it can. Yeah. But that's part of what Descent into Midnight is kind of trying to do. There's a lot of things we're trying to do with this game, but one of the things is that I think we're all really proud of is that people come into the game. So many people are like, I'm going to play this game because I know like Richard, or I know, me, or I know Taylor or somebody. And it's like, it sounds interesting. And so, yeah, I'll sit down and play it, but I don't know anything about the oceans. So this is going to be weird. Well, they find out pretty quickly they don't have to. Yeah. The way that we've set the game up. And every single game I've run, there's been somebody at the table who said, I don't know anything about the ocean, who has ended up educating everybody at the table about the freakiest or the coolest or the scariest thing they've ever heard of about the ocean. And everybody's on their phone looking it up. And I'm just like, we've created a game in which people are doing research on their own planet right now about things that really exist, even though this is a science fiction setting, not even set on Earth, some other planet that the players are creating together.
Yeah.
It allows them the freedom to use the inspiration of science from our world, but not being restricted by the science or feeling like they have to know it to work it out. It's an alien world. You can do whatever you want. And we set it up to be open. That's why we chose the Powered by the Apocalypse system, because we allow the players to create the world, to create the corruption, to create the civilization, to create the species that they want that are the most interesting to them. And we started off trying to make our own species, but it just became pretty quickly realized that like nothing we make is going to be as interesting as what somebody else thinks is the most interesting, thing that they've heard of. So
when it comes to systems, because there are different systems, everybody knows what D&D is if they know what role-playing games are, right? Like, I have yet to find that person that has role-played without ever interacting with D&D.
Right.
So with that, how does Powered by the Apocalypse compare to D&D, and did that weigh heavily into the decision on which system you were going to base it in?
So yes and no. It's a bit of a long story. So short answer is Descent to Midnight started off as a joke. It started off as a Twitter joke.
So no.
Our friend,
I've seen that a few times. I've seen that. It's always jokes or 2 a.m. sleep deprived tweets of, hey, what if I?
Actually, Whelmed started off as a joke as well. Now it's 135 hours, right? So our friend Quinn Wilson, I'm pretty sure it was Quinn from the Swallows of the South and the Arms of the Tide podcast. They had just run a one shot of Monster Hearts, which is a great game, Powered by the Apocalypse game. And what turns out to be now one of the other designers, Richard, made a joke about about having a playbook or what they call a skin for a character. In there, you have like a vampire skin or a werewolf skin or a demon skin or whatever. It's kind of like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer role-playing game. And he was joking about a creature from the Black Lagoon skin. And he said we could call it Brosidon because it's all high school stuff. And of course, somebody immediately tags me in it because I'm the Aquatic gaming guy. And that was like, oh, Brosidon. And I'm like, oh man, now I've got all these playbooks running through my head as to reskin Monster Hearts with all of these Aquatic playbooks. And that's literally where everything started. It's pretty funny. And I was running at one of the demo games at Gen Con last year, and they actually made a character they called Brosidon. He was he was basically a seahorse with arms that were super buff. It was hilarious. It was so funny. Anyway, so that's how it started. So we really kind of went straight into there. But it's a little bit more of a complicated answer to your question because this is a kind of game that I have wanted to create since I was a teenager. But literally the role-playing game technology had not advanced to a space to do this.
Uh-oh. I think we're having some technical difficulties, guys. We will have this worked out shortly. Hopefully. It's unusual. Okay, guys. So while we try and figure out what is going on with the cams and stuff, we are gonna take a bit of an early break, make it really quick. Hopefully, we will see you guys shortly. Whoops. Yep. See you guys in a moment. Okay, guys, seems we've got everything worked out, and we are back.
With the internet, sorry about that.
It's internet being internet. It's all good. It happens. We know this.
So what I was saying before, I think before I saw you freeze up and just look at me for a really long time, was that D&D is a simulationist game. So it's focused on your character's physical score, right? How strong are you? How smart are you? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the kind of games that I wanted to run, the kind of games that I run at the table, no matter what the system is, my games are driven by emotion. I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer. I want to take people on an emotional ride. And you can do that in D&D, but it's not baked into the mechanics.
Yeah, and it's something where you have to kind of either, if you didn't naturally do it or your group didn't naturally do it and they want to do it, it's a training of mindset to do it.
Exactly. And back in the day, there were people who tried to kind of gamify the role-playing experience, but there was something in players, including myself, be like, why are you making me play my character a particular way? Right? Why are you telling me mechanically how I need to play my character? So that was a mindset that didn't even exist. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, so played games for a long time, was playing a ton of D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder and that kind of stuff. And then I started listening, like I said, to these other podcasts, like One Shot Podcast Network and whatnot. And they play like a different game system every month. And then I started listening to these other systems, and it was like I had this 10-year gap in looking at role-playing games. And I came back and felt like I'd been in a time machine. And technology had jumped forward. And I heard about games like 14 Days, which is this brilliant role-playing game by Hannah Schaefer that focuses on, it's designed to build empathy for people with chronic pain. This is a role-playing game that has a purpose, right? It's a targeted goal, or Our Radios Are Dying, which is the very specific experience about two lovers who are going to die at the end of this game and trying to have these emotional conversation with each other about their relationship. And I was like, what is happening right now? This is amazing. So the kind of game I wanted to run, I wanted to create, is really Descent into Midnight. Descent into Midnight is all of my nonsense all wrapped up in a role-playing game, right? But I didn't have the tools to be able to do that, and Powered by the Apocalypse does. Our ability scores or stats in our game aren't about the physical aspects of your body, because it doesn't matter. You could be playing a whale and a krill in the same. I mean, how do you even do that? It's like having Hawkeye and the Hulk in the same party. Like, who cares what your strength is? Like, it's just irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right. So our system, the stats are hope and altruism and community, right? And calm and drive. It's about what your relationship is to yourself, your team that you're with and your relationship to the city that you live in that you're protecting. And just like with games, other Powered by the Apocalypse games like Masks, New Generation, which is a big influence on our game as well, there's no harm track or hit points or anything. When you take damage, quote unquote, when something hurts you or affects you, you take a condition. So you may, and a lot of times you can choose what condition you end up taking depending on what the situation is. So like if Hulk punches you in the face, then you think, I don't ask, say, how many hit points did you take? I say, how does that make you feel? Right?
Makes me angry.
Right. Yeah. So you could get angry, and that's a condition. That's the opposite of calm. Or you might say, none of my friends were here to help me. I'm feeling isolated, which is the opposite of community. Or I'm feeling selfish and I'm going to run away. That's the opposite of altruism. Mm-hmm. So, and once you have all of these psychological or psychospiritual, psycho-emotional conditions marked, if you're forced to take another condition, you just have to remove yourself from the situation. Either you could physically go unconscious if you're reading it as kind of damage, physical as well as emotional damage, but like, or just running away or leaving or doing some other things that you can do. So the game is really focused on that. And there's a bit of a spiritual level to it. It's actually an advanced alien technology, an advanced alien civilization, but the world that it's set on that you create can't be touched by humans at all. So this is also a game that's supposed to build empathy for things that are not us, things that are other, like learning to understand that there's more than just humanity, not being so anthropocentric in how we view the world, and understanding that there are other things out there, other ways to look at things. The technology is advanced, but it's underwater. So it's not really like metal submarines and that kind of stuff. It's all based on bioengineering and psionics. And then there's a whole system of kind of psionics and psychospiritual exploration as well that we get into the game. So we're finding people are coming in and telling us this is tapping into, one of the players specifically said, this is tapping into areas of my imagination I didn't even know I had, because it's such an alien setting. But the way that we set the game up, and we're glad that Powered by Apocalypse really already helped with a lot of this, the way that we were able to set this game up is people can go as deep into the weirdness and the unusualness and the aquatic nature of it as much as they want to. They don't have to have a big source book full of stuff to read to even understand what's happening. That's not how the game works. And so it's allowing people to introduce themselves to ideas. I mean, because none of the characters are human, or even humanoid for that matter. You could have a game where you decide to all play mermaids. That's come up. That's absolutely could. You could do the Little Mermaid and just substitute, have the psionic abilities we have, just call them magic and go with Little Mermaid. By all means, I'm sure we'll have a skin for that or a play set for that. But generally people are playing things like, God, we have one player played the manifestation of echolocation. So it was a sentient burst of sound. We had another player who was playing a school of psychically linked goldfish that lived inside the body of a non-sentient jellyfish. That was basically their vehicle. It was this symbiotic relationship they had. And that when that species decided to breed, like two of the goldfish would leave the jellyfish and find another jellyfish, and they would breed. But when they left, they would take that percentage of the memories with them. And so all of the species of this creature all had they were all related and had all these, parts of these racially or these genetically passed memories to them. The stuff that people are coming up with, they're like, that's cooler than I could even think of. Like, I don't even know what's happening right now. My mind is being blown off.
Yeah, that sounds really, really wild. Especially when you consider the myth on how long goldfish memory is, but then B, the reality that while yes, it is not 3 seconds, it is still short.
Yes, but remember, this is an alien world, so everything's an analog. So it's like they're goldfish analogs, right? But then we had another player, a really good friend of mine. He was like, I really don't know anything, and all these people are coming up with cool stuff. He's like, can I just play a walrus? And I was like, you got it. You're a walrus, and you're a walrus who can hold his breath for 24 hours, just so we don't need to worry about you coming to the surface. what ended up happening is as the game was, is that one shot was developing, he started to realize, he's like, wait a minute, I'm the only one with actual air in my lungs, right? And I said, yeah. He's like, I play a flute. I sit on this coral mountain top where my home is, and I play this flute, which is this haunting thing that no one in the community can possibly duplicate. And he became like the wise person on the mountain that people went to go see. It was so good. Right. But that way people can introduce, they can feel comfortable at the level they want. And because they're sitting there and they're now got their toe in the water, I guess pun intended, that they can, once they get there and they feel more comfortable, then they can dive in more. And because we emphasize a lot of player agency in the decisions about the creation of the world and the society, everyone is helping everybody else out. Nobody has to just sit there and be super creative on their own. Everybody else can give ideas.
Yeah. Ugh. And we're hearing good pun, 4 out of 5.
Wait, what was that?
Good pun, 4 out of 5.
Oh, okay, fine. I'm not Rich Krutz-Landry. Richard Krutz-Landry is our pun master of the design team, so I'm just trying to do him justice if I possibly can.
I think toe in the water for an aquatic adventure is very...
I use diving
on
in
the
a lot.
nose.
You'll hear me say dive in on Whelmed a lot as well. Let's dive in. I just can't. I can't not do it. Apparently,
it's okay. It's okay. We all have our things that we can't not do.
That's right. That's right.
So, I think we did. Yeah.
I think we ran through a lot of some of the questions that you had originally put up. But... Yeah,
actually, quite a bit. Very, very well. In your eyes, what is the biggest flaw with the game, mechanically or otherwise? And you can thank Mr. Bolter for adding that as one of the questions I will be regularly asking people, because it's like, hey, that is hard. What is wrong with my thing? Well, what could be fixed? And maybe it's not necessarily wrong or needs fixing, but it is a flaw.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that we've tried to fix, like that we've sat down. I mean, it's why you play test. You got to play test. I mean, we thought things were working great, and we'd sit down with different group, and it was just like, whoops, that's totally broken. We need to fix that. So the game itself is getting pretty tight now. So we're leading into a Kickstarter later this year, looking about October probably. By the time the Kickstarter starts, I mean, the playtest packet you can play right now. We have 10 playbooks that are pretty tight. Though, having said that, I just ran a playtest, and we found a problem with one of the newest playbooks and fixed it. But if you're talking about an overall general weak point in the game, a thing that really concerned me was this idea of how strange it is. It is a strange game. It is all of my nonsense, and I don't know why I would expect anybody else to love my nonsense the way that I do. I mean, it's an alien underwater culture with psionics and bioengineering, and it's all of these things that I personally love. Somebody joked and they said, oh, look, Rich made a game about underwater superheroes, psionic superheroes. It's like, of course he did. Right. But I'm like, it's such a niche, like you said, so it's a niche thing. So why would I expect people to be drawn to it? And so I think if there's a big flaw, it's just people being intimidated by this setting and idea. So it's really important to all of us, to Taylor, Richard and I, to make sure that people understand that you do not need to know a lot of stuff to come into it. But it is, I think, still intimidating to people coming into the system. So it's less about the system itself. If you've played any PBTA games, then you're going to fold right into this. You'll get the idea. Okay. If you've never played a PBTA game, any PBTA game that you go into is going to be new and weird. I ran a play test for a table full of people. Almost none of them had played PBTA. They all were really, really experienced with D&D, and they were expecting the reactionary aspect of D&D. Like, I put a number hulk in front of you. What do you do? Kind of a thing, where PBTA is more of a conversation, and you stumble on moves or that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of player agency of question asking. What do you think is happening? What do you think is going on here? And that takes a little training. It takes a little getting used to. But if you know that,
maybe a little easier for players in groups who do the collaborative world building a little bit more heavier than saying, okay, DM, put all this stuff together for us. Let us go play in your little world.
Right. And, I have so many miniatures, so many maps. I've made friends with so many cartographers. I have got the most gorgeous. I love my mom. This is where I attribute it to. My mom, when I was a kid, had a dollhouse store called Mini Mansions in the town we grew up in. And I grew up going into that store all the time with all the little dioramas and all the little stuff. I mean, it's just exactly miniatures for D&D. And I always, when I was younger, all we had was graph paper and some pretty crappy miniatures made out of poisonous lead. That's basically what we had. So, right, not anymore.
This is from 1976.
Don't put it in your mouth. That's all.
Oh, never, ever. Kidding, that would ruin the paint. It took forever to paint that pretty house.
That's a good reason, yeah. Also kill you. But anyway. So when I got older, and even just pre-painted minis that came out with WizKids, and then those have gotten really impressive with some of these pre-paints, and then like Dwarven Forge and like the ability to make all these things. I was kid in a candy store. I've got so much of that stuff and I love it. And I feel like it's visually interesting for people and visually inspiring to myself, because I'm not an artist, right? To be able to pull this stuff up and do this. I would prep 8-10 hours for a 4-hour D&D session, right? To do all this stuff. And now I run PBTA games all the time, and you literally can't prepare. Like you're not allowed to prepare. It's against basically the rules to prepare anything. If you prepare stuff, right? Like I have like, once the game gets going, you can have a few ideas for the next session, but there's basically nothing you do. I've gone exactly the opposite. Like there's no minis for Descent into Midnight. Like it's all theater of the mind. And you know what? I love that too. I love them both. Right. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's so different to get people at a table to talk about. I wanted originally to have people come into my world and have me entertain them. And now I'm like, you guys are here to entertain me. Right. So hopefully you're having a good time, but my goal is for me to have a good time along with you and find out what happens. Cause I don't even know what's going to happen a lot of times. And the way it comes together with the improv acting with PBTA games is mind blowing sometimes what people come up with.
I think what I'm reading into it at least is a lot of, oh, hey, here's an idea. Go out, do some research. Now come back, tell me about it, and we'll play with it together.
Right. Basically. And again, like people sit around the table and they'll be like, hey, I heard about this weird way that sand dollars eat. And I heard this in one of the play tests that one of the other designers was running. And I was listening to the audio and I was like, oh no, because I know what that is. It's called an Aristotle's lantern. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? And they were like, oh, it's this Aristotle's lantern thing where it's these 5-bladed things that like dig into and pull out chunks of flesh. They're like, what? Yeah. And everybody's on their phone and they're all horrified. And I was just laughing. It was so funny. And that person was a person who was saying, I don't know that much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because right? I mean, sand dollars are adorable and great to collect when they are dead on the beach, but like...
Yeah. Under a microscope, horrifying.
Yeah. That's honestly, I think as humans, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, on us being so centered on ourselves that we don't see what's around us. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. The world is terrifying.
And so fascinating.
Yes.
So fascinating.
Yes, but I can say I'm definitely one of those people who can admire the ocean from a distance, but I will not step foot in it. Nope. Nope. I'll go to space. I'm one of those. I'll go to space first. You know why? Because I know what's going to happen there. I'm going to run out of air and I'm going to just. This is the thing
that trips people out. I tell people like, okay, so the on the surface of our planet, atmosphere it's one level of atmosphere.
Oh yeah.
So the difference between space and Earth is one atmosphere, right? There's 0 atmospheres in space, 1 atmosphere on the surface of the planet. The bottom of the Marianas Trench is 1,100 atmospheres. There is a fish that lives under 7 tons per square inch of pressure. That ghost fish that lives down there. And people are like, I can't even comprehend what that is, right? And that's some of the intimidatingness of running something in the water too, is the idea of people don't know what they need to pay attention to, what they don't need to pay attention to, and it feels intimidating. But I look at people, I'm like, you know what? We have fantasy characters climbing 14,000 foot mountains all the time, and we don't give a crap about air thinness.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody cares about that. So, you can hand wave some of it but there have been underwater monsters and creatures since the very first monster manual, and so few of them ever get used really well. Aboleth are brilliant villains and antagonists, and they very rarely ever get used in their own environment. And because people don't want to go down there, they're just like, no, they're terrible. Right. But there are so many interesting things that you can do to really make your games fresh and interesting, even for old grognards. Like just taking it and changing the environment up. It can be just even a few things is really interesting. I ran an entirely aquatic one shot for the Don't Split the Podcast Network under an entirely aquatic society. Everything was all an underwater adventure. We had a Romvardian from God's Fall, and he was like, "I hate underwater adventures." I'm like, "Well, welcome to this game." And he ended up playing basically a sentient dolphin, a seat priest. He called Brother Flip. And he got done with that game, and he was like, "I love Brother Flip. I have to play him again. It's amazing."
And it's always great when you can change a mindset too. And that's one of the powerful things is the ability to share ideas and learn and teach together. And it's just... It's not recognized enough.
And that's for me, this is why I play, right? I want to know more. I want to feel. I'm big with the bleed. I like to feel the bleed. I want the emotions, as long as it's safe, right?
Okay. I was gonna say,
but I mean, like I want to feel if my character is having a hard time, and I understand it's the character. I'm okay with feeling that because I know it's not me, right? As long as it's not something that triggers a trauma, that's a whole different kind of thing. But what I'm talking about is like, I want that emotional story, and I want to share it with the people around us. I want to walk away like we have had a shared experience for something that no one else has. And also I want to educate people about things. So having helped create this game in which other people are teaching each other about marine biology just makes me super happy, because there's so much amazing stuff down there. We know so little about it. And I think it's critical. I think it's critical to learn more and to be okay with that, and to understand the breadth and the depth and the amazingness of life on Earth. So
that it's wide. It is, and it's, yeah. So I think we've fairly covered what your favorite thing is about the game as well, right? As well as how you got into tabletop role-playing games. That's with your backstory.
My sleep spell, my crit sleep spell.
Yep. Which that's awesome. And the fact that they kind of guided you, like not necessarily saying, "Hey, you can just do this whenever." Just it's one of the things that, as a DM and player myself, is what I consider, and it's my own personal preference. Not saying that it's not okay, but my personal preference, it just seems like people use magic recklessly. And it's like, you don't understand how powerful this stuff is, and you gotta be careful, and just...
Yeah, and it's a whole conversation.
We know that every character I play sits there and analyzes the situation. Is this good to do now, or is it bad? This is bad.
I was pretty lucky. My brother's 8 years older than I am, and he taught me what role playing really was, not just rolling the dice, but like, cause I did a lot of that when I was 14. Right. But, he'd come home from the military and kind of really pointed out like what you can do, like what this technology of role playing games can do and where it can take you. And I latched onto that emotional story aspect of it. And I was pretty lucky to have him be there and be so willing to help me out and to guide me along that and welcome me to the table. And then decades later, I ran a game for my brother's son and his friend's son in that same house with that pinball machine in the background. I ran a 3.5 game for them. It was pretty amazing. So it was like 30 years later or something, 25 years later. Yeah, it was pretty great.
So what was that first character like as a character? We know that he had the one spell, but
that was the character that they gave me. The first character I ever created, though, like myself, was a half-elf ranger. And I actually rebuilt him in 5th edition Caleb, my first season co-host for Whelmed, and I had talked about doing an actual play, which was a high level actual play. So everybody was we were going to invite a bunch of people from the RPG community that people knew to play their first character they ever created, but level them up to a 20th level 5th edition character and have this party of the first characters we've ever played play together. So I got to like respec him and create him later. And that was a pretty cool experience.
That sounds cool. 20th level, man. Someday.
I know. I've actually never played a 20th level game.
See, I don't care if I'm DMing it. I want to experience it at some point. Now, I understand that that's challenges in and of itself because there really aren't a lot of monsters that are inherently set to deal with a party with even one 20 level character, not to mention the entire party. Like,
right.
you are definitely sending groups of monsters that aren't typically sent as groups.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm excited for that.
Converting first edition to 5th edition is doable, but it's very different. So it was a ranger, and back in the day, the rangers had their follower charts. All the classes had follower charts, and their follower charts were the best because it was all like, giant intelligent lynxes and treants and like Pegasus and hippogriffs. And I was like, of course I'm playing this. But, then the Beastmaster, ranger only has one animal, and that's basically the best you can do. So we had to figure some things out and do a lot of, again, player agency and some tweaking, but it was pretty impressive. I actually got a piece of artwork done for him, modernized by an absolutely brilliant artist named Dominique Nazidi. I'll throw it up if people are coming out to my Twitter feed. I'll put it up so it's up in a recent post. It's absolutely gorgeous, and I love every piece of it. So yeah. That was it. But that elf was just a throwaway magic item character. I don't even. I picture him like Yoda, but Yoda didn't even exist yet at the time. So I don't know.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That might be accurate, though. Might be accurate. I mean,
yeah.
Yoda's kind of goblin-like in appearance.
I know, right? Basically, that's how I played. He was a first level wizard. He would just like a little elf. He was just kind of like running around. He only had like one hit. I gave him like one hit point. So like, I mean, you blow on him, he died. A normal cat sneezes on him, he falls over.
Don't like NPC villagers have more than 1 HP?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, game balance from the back in the day was
different,
not well designed. Actually, one of the other Tribality writers, Brandis Stoddard, has this brilliant series called History of the Classes, where he takes each class and he breaks it down and looks at it from original D&D and takes it through every iteration that there's ever been up to the modern day. And like his breakdown of the fighter and the monk and the ranger are fascinating about how they changed and evolved. The bard one was just bonkers.
I'm going to want to see what they did with druid, because druid will always be my... I know people complain that druid is OP now, but it's my understanding that generally has always been considered kind of OP.
A little bit, yeah. Well, they used to be a subclass of cleric, and then they split them off, and it's the whole thing. You got to Brandis is brilliant the way he breaks it down, and he talks basically about the evolution of game mechanics from the 70s to the almost the 2020s now. So like you get to see the spotlight of the evolution of things through it, which is really, really cool. Yeah. So
okay. Excuse me.
No worries.
So, what is, looking back, something that you would change about that character? And I guess since you have, you know what you would have changed, because you did. If there was a change, did you make it? Would you have?
What ended up happening was when I first created him, I played him almost like a Captain America-y like character. So he was a charismatic leader of people and animals both, and he ended up being a lord of this land. He made it to 12th level, which in first edition was ridiculous. So when I created him now, I made him, he's a ranger, but he also had some of the Battlemaster related stuff. And so in building him, I really leaned into the charisma aspect of it. And 5th edition really kind of lets you do that without it throwing off the game balance too much. So allowing him to be able to lean into the things that made sense for him like being more of the leader, right? A hero of the people who became a lord, basically. And so also in retrospect, like I had a lot of his big stories because back in the day we went through the whole big modules, right? Like the whole Against the Giant series and into the Vault of the Drow. Like we went through all of that stuff, Expedition of the Barrier Peaks, and just all of these classics. And so I have in my head these bullet points of things he went through that whole time, and I can look at the big picture of his story and kind of see where that character developed and how he developed and how I wanted him to be, and that charismatic kind of leader, that warrior, but good-hearted, was something I really had to role play, and I wanted that first edition, second edition couldn't do as well, I think, as fifth edition can do. Yeah. So it gives you more freedom for that, and that's what I ended up doing when I rebuilt him.
Well, and maybe part of that is that there is a slow move to get away from using the dice to tell as much of the story. And that's a good thing. But at the same time, those of us who like our math clicky clacks might have an issue if we get too far. It's like, what's my excuse to get him? We got to have the excuse. Right, exactly. So you, as you've mentioned, you're also one of the co-creators of Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. How did you get started with podcasting?
It was being guests on podcasts, really. So either like this great podcast called the Get Hype Pod that I was on there talking about Blue Planet 2, which just came out recently, and talking about stuff there, and then just even if it's just a marine biology thing, or being on role-playing game podcasts and running actual plays or being a guest on them and that kind of stuff. It really helped being in Tribality, and then being able to kind of, I basically just asked the Dungeon Masters block guys, hey, do you want to have an episode where you talk about aquatic stuff? And that was my first appearance on a podcast, and I became addicted immediately. And so I was a guest on it. I listened to a lot of them. And people had asked me for a long time, like, when are you going to do your own podcasts? And I was like, well, I have no interest in doing a podcast just to do a podcast. And second of all, I don't edit. I just talk, and I'm a talker. But I don't have those. I have a lot of skill sets, and I do not have room to learn that right now. So I was like, I'm not going to put that burden on somebody else. And I don't know. I want something to know if I can do a podcast that's different and something that I can contribute in a way. Again, I want to lean into my own nonsense and make it passionate for me. So Whelmed is about Young Justice, which is a DC Comics animated series that came out for a couple of years and then was canceled due to some contract stuff. It wasn't because the show wasn't amazing, because honestly, it's the most brilliantly written piece of television in the United States for the last couple of decades. It's brilliant. We have 135 hours of podcast analyzing 35 hours of animated series. So, and we're not stopping. So, the layers and layers and layers of plotting and character development that go into this show is incredible. Well, Netflix picked up the first 2 seasons. And of course, Netflix had been picking up other shows. And the second season ended, and we wanted to know what was happening next. So there was a campaign called Keep Binging YJ that started. And during that campaign, I was rewatching Young Justice on Netflix and trying to drive the numbers up. But I was also on Twitter, and I was talking about, hey, did you notice in this episode, in the background, look at the television set and what's on while this character is doing this thing? And it's a foreshadowing of something that happens 14 episodes later in this animated series in the background. There, in the first 5 minutes of the first episode, a character says something that foreshadows the finale 26 episodes later. And when you rewatch the show, it sends a chill down your spine when he says it. Yeah. And so pointing out some of these things online, and then talking about the history of the characters, because there was a lot of friends of mine that were watching it because they were hearing good things. And so it was on Netflix, so you know, something to binge. And so they were just talking about like, oh, this is great, but I don't know this character. And I was like, oh, well, let me tell you a little about the character. You don't have to know it to watch the show, but if you do, it can be pretty interesting. Eventually, Darcy Ross, who's a friend of mine, she works with Monty Cook Games now, and she's also an evolutionary biologist and a marine freak like me. So we met a long time ago, where she started live tweeting her watch of Young Justice. And as she was live tweeting, I was responding to her questions. And then eventually it became a joke. Somebody was like, you need to do a podcast about this. This is crazy, the stuff you're saying right now, all this stuff about the conscious creation and the foreshadowing and the layouts and how they change the characters. Like, we want more. And I was like, what, really? Like, is this really what you want? And then Caleb literally stepped into the conversation and said, let me help you make this a reality. And I was like, no, you don't really mean that. And he DM'd me and he's like, I am not messing around. Let's do this.
We're doing this.
And I was like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't edit. And he's like, I got you. I'm like, okay, if this is what you want to do, then I'll do it. But we're not just doing a sit around and talk about how much we love the podcast. We're doing something different. And this is what we're doing. So Whelmed the Young Justice Files is actually set up with segments. And one of the segments, for example, is called the Canary Debrief. Black Canary is one of the characters from the show. And in one of the episodes, she psychologically counsels the kids after a terrible trauma that happens. And so we call that section the Canary Debrief. And in the Canary Debrief, I talk about what you can learn about the storytelling process from the episode that you just watched. So we talk about the actual theories of creation, like the rule of three, and how you place things in a particular episode, or what gets presented and when and how. We talk about developing villains and developing characters in certain ways, how to write ensemble casts. We talk about gaming as well, particularly in the first season a lot, because of course Caleb and I are both gamers. So we talk about like, what can you learn from this to bring to your table as well. And so my kind of insidious plan with Whelmed is to have people say like, hey, I love this show. I want to hear a couple of geeks talking about this show. But then they leave our show and they walk away with knowing more about not just the creative writing process, but with the guests that we have on, we talk about linguistics, we talk about sociology, psychology, we talk about so many different aspects of things. We had Quinn Wilson again, who I had mentioned earlier. He came on the show and we had a mind-blowing episode where he talked about the use of linguistics and psychology in the development of character. And it was so good. I learned so much stuff about that. We had Dr. Drea Letamendi, who's a psychologist who has a podcast called The Arkham Sessions. And she does a psychological analysis of every single episode of Batman the Animated Series. And it's brilliant. And we had her on to talk about stuff. Crispin Freeman's one of the voice actors from the show, and he also happens to be a mythology scholar. So he came on the show and we got this comparative Eastern and Western mythology lesson. MC Gould, who's from What the Force podcast, she came on. She's a mythologist, and she was talking about the comparisons of Jason and the Argonauts with the Young Justice team, and the idea that the Hall of Justice is like the Parthenon, and that it's so good. Basically, I just get to invite these people who are passionate about what they want and love Young Justice and bring them on the show to inspire people to learn more about the world, to not be passive consumers, to try and be more active consumers, both to enjoy the deeper stories that are being told by the things that they love, but also to produce more, to be able to produce more cool stuff that I get to see that only they can produce. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm super proud of the show because we get a lot of reviews where people are like, man, I came for Young Justice. I'm walked away. Now I have all these ideas and things that I want to do, or I know more about sociology, the sociological aspects of things. So we really don't mess around. And I'm proud to say that we got the attention of Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, the two producers and showrunners of the show. Greg Weisman was the creator of Gargoyles for Disney back in the day as well.
I remember that show.
Yeah,
it's loved great. That show.
It's fantastic. And we got their attention much earlier than we expected. Actually, after our third episode, Brandon Vietti messaged us directly and said, I love your show. And I just about passed out. So they are regular listeners to the show now, which is a little nerve-wracking because we do critique the show as well. And there are a couple times where we're like, this could have been done a little bit better. Not very often, but periodically. And we have to forget the fact that Greg listens the day they drop. So we have been invited to do some pretty incredible things. My co-host Emily and I, and our producer Neil Powell, we were invited up to Burbank, and we are actually on the bonus material for the digital release of the first two seasons of Young Justice. We're on the commentary tracks. And we've gotten to do interviews. We've been on the DC Universe, the DC Daily Show for the DC Universe. I've been on half a dozen times now. So what happened is this campaign did quite well, and then Warner Brothers decided to greenlight the third season of Young Justice, and they put it on their DC Universe app. Mm-hmm. And so the first 13 episodes dropped in January. The next 13 episodes drop next month in July. So we got our third season back. And as much as we've talked about the first two seasons, season 3 makes season 1 and 2 look like amateur hour. Could not have expected it. And Brandon and Greg have both said, which I'm so honored, they're like, you made us step our game up.
I was going to say, but doesn't that go back to the whole rule of threes thing? And it is consistently with shows that tend to make it longer that the third season is where things start getting really, really serious.
Well, the first season things get serious. Like, this show does not mess around from the get-go, but the third season, some of it is because they're not on Cartoon Network anymore.
And so they're
Warner Brothers said, do what you want. And it still feels like the first two seasons. They just have a few, just every once in a while you realize, oh, yeah, we're not on Cartoon Network anymore with that scene. Okay, that's fine.
Toto, we left Kansas.
Right. But it's not like it's a completely different show and it's full of like graphic horror or whatever. Like, it's still the same show. It just has a few things that they're able to show or say or do that they couldn't do before. Mm-hmm. But it's been quite the experience to be able to do that and now know some of these people. And we'll see what happens. We've not gotten any word on a season 4 yet, which is a little disappointing because the animation process takes a really long time. And season 4 theoretically should have been greenlit pretty much before season 3 aired if they were going to do it, to get the animation going. We'll see. San Diego Comic-Con might have an announcement. We'll see. But we'll see where it goes from there. But so that's where that came from. And then I have a half a dozen other ideas for other podcasts that I want to do that, again, lean pretty heavily into my nonsense. And so if for some reason we don't have a season 4, then we'll probably just wind down Whelmed naturally. We've got a bunch of interviews. We've got a bunch of other stuff we want to do, and analyze, of course, the last 13 episodes and then let that kind of wind down and be what it is, and then move on to some other projects as well. So,
yeah. It's always good to have a plan. I was going to say, when there's nothing left, what do you do? Well,
I got too many plans. Things. That's the problem.
Yeah. Write them down on a piece of paper, put them on a dartboard, throw darts.
They already have Twitter feeds, just nobody follows them because they don't know they exist yet.
That's smart.
And one of the big ones is actually started as a joke at a bar at Gen Con. Somebody was asking, like, so what do you do if a centaur has a heart attack? They were like, where's the heart? Is it in the body of the horse? Is it in the chest of the person? Like, what is the deal? And I was like,
I like to think something that's like a Time Lord. It's got 2 hearts.
Well, I was a veterinary nurse for a decade, and I'm in ICU. I was a code nurse at the time for the ICU. I'm like, do you want to have this conversation? Because I'm in. And they were like, it was me and Dan Dillon, who's a writer for WotC now. He was an editor at the time. He and I met when he edited some work that I did freelance. And then we started talking about it, and then a bunch of other people started joining us. And then the joke went around that I should start a podcast talking about basically the realities of medicine in a fantasy setting. So once again, this insidious plan of people coming to listen to something kind of fun and interesting, but then walking away knowing something about real world medicine when they leave. And it's the idea is called How to Code Your Dragon. And so that may be a thing that ends up coming up at some point. I don't have time to do it.
I think I might be on the line for if that one happens, because at least far as, oh, hey, I want to know about this stuff, because when you consider some of the players that do prefer to keep stuff a little bit more like lifelike, who like to do their called shots or whatever.
Oh, well, yeah, sure.
You know, that could be some powerful stuff, because then it's like, no, but you know now. This is what would make the most sense. This is what this would look like. This is how this would behave. This is...
My big thing, which I wrote a whole article on Tribality about, is I am so tired of TV shows that shock flatlines. Though people's hearts have stopped, you cannot restart their heart by shocking them. It's not a car battery. That's not how we work.
Yeah.
So if people just walk away with knowing that every episode, that would be fantastic. But yeah, it sounds like a ton of fun, and it's definitely, once again, pretty much all of my nonsense in a podcast. And that way I can just talk about it. I'm like, look, people can listen to it or not listen to it, and I don't have to bore my wife or friends with it.
They've heard it. They're like, yes, we know.
Yeah. How many times I get tagged by Dan Dillon whenever somebody shocks a flatline. He's like, I was watching this movie, and I'm like, oh no, here it comes. They did it again. This movie was so good. Now I can't like it because they shocked a flatline.
Nightmares.
Yeah.
It sounds like personal nightmare there.
That's pretty funny.
So what has it been like working with Caleb as co-creator and initial co-host?
Oh man, I can't say enough. I mean, first of all, you can just listen to our first season and we're laughing our heads off. It's fantastic. He was so professional. He knew his stuff. We had similar views on some things and different views on other things, which was great for the podcast. We did 2 45-minute episodes a week. So not only did he, and every week was a review episode of an episode from season 1, and there were 26 season 1 episodes. So he'd do a review episode with me, record it with me, and then edit that. And then I would typically do a bonus episode of some sort. So either episodes we call Secret Origins, where I would go in just myself talking about like 20 to 40 minutes on the history of a character and how they changed it, like all 5 canon Robins and who they are and where they came from and are we going to see them and how they're different and blah, blah, blah. He'd edit all those. And then I would do the discussion sessions where we would have these people on, to talk about like whatever. Ishan Sherwood from Total Party Thrill came on and talked about the diversity in the show. Like we just did this stuff. We just did all these things, and he edited all of that, 2 episodes a week, in addition to working full time and having a whole entire other RPG Academy like network. Like when we decided to do, I say we, but it was really me, decided to do 2 episodes a week, I thought he was going to murder me. And
does he sleep?
Well, he does now, because about halfway through season 1, we realized that he was not going to be able to do season 2 because his wife was pregnant, he was having a baby, and he was getting a job change. Mm-hmm. And now we were 14 to 15 episodes ahead on recording and editing because the show had already aired. So we could sit down and we could review in one sitting 3 or 4 episodes in a row. It didn't need to be topical, right? And so we were ahead on recording, but we were realizing ahead of time that we weren't going to have a season 2, or I need to find another co-host and an editor. Then Neil Powell stepped in, who is one of the best human beings on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. He is from the DM's block and DM Nastics. He stepped in, started doing the editing, and now he's full-on producer of our show. And then during the season 1, there was a woman who started having these conversations with us on Twitter and basically telling me how I was wrong about this one character.
Oh man.
The character of Miss Martian. But here's the thing. She was so good. She was brilliant. She was kind and considerate. She was thoughtful. She was analytical and clear. It was just, I was reading this and I was like, nope, yeah, she's right. I was totally wrong. She's absolutely changed my mind on all of this. And we had people on Twitter going like, can you please get whoever this woman is on the show for a discussion session about romantic arcs and fan fiction? Because that's basically what she was talking about. And I was like, I'm ahead of you already. I've already sent her a message, like, get her on the show.
Yeah.
Her name was Emily Booza. And she got scheduled to come on the show. Mm-hmm. But I talked to her a bunch of times off Twitter before that. And then Neil and Caleb and I had a meeting. And I said, guys, if she's as good on mic as I suspect she's going to be, I want to ask her to be the season 2 co-host. She's 20 years old, college student. She's not a middle-aged white guy like me. She was literally 13. She was the same age as Robin was when this show first aired. She was 13 at the time when it first aired and was buried in an area of fan fiction and stuff in the fandom that I know nothing about. Mm-hmm. Right. She's articulate. She's smart. She's just brilliant. I was like, if she's going to be, I can already tell she's a theater major. And like, I'm just like, she's going to be good on mic.
Yeah.
And then they were like, yep, we agree. I say, great. So we got done with this. It ended up being a double length episode discussion session on fan fiction and romantic arcs, which was awesome. We get to the end and I say, so at the end, I was like, so can you tell people where to find you? And she was like, well, I don't have a podcast like some of these other people do, but here you can find me on Twitter to talk about stuff. And I was like, okay, great. We closed the show out and I was like, hey, so remember that thing you said about not having a podcast? She was like, yeah. And I'm like, I'd like you to be my co-host for season 2. And she just, it floored her and it was amazing.
Yeah.
She's since now she was flown out from the East Coast to Burbank by Machinima Studios to basically be an expert and be on the digital release of Young Justice. Had lunch with Greg and Brandon, met Stephanie Lemlin and Eric Lopez and Cam Bowen, who are voice actors in the show. Like, it's been a fantastic experience. She's now been on a ton of other podcasts. She's really made this, like, she took this like bull by the horns and made this opportunity her own. And she's absolutely brilliant. I cannot say enough things about Emily or Caleb or Neil for that matter. There'd be no podcast without them. I'm just a guy who talks. I'm the guy who knows people. That's my superpower. I know people. That's basically it.
That is in its own sense, its own superpower, though, because some people, you never learn how to make those connections. You never learn how to reach out or how to talk. I mean, there's power in that, and people, we don't learn it. It's not something that is taught. It's something you can learn.
Yeah.
You can learn from other sources, but it is not particularly taught anywhere, and it's its own skill set.
Yeah. And some of it's really just getting out of your own way. Like, I wasn't like this when I was 20, but I'll be 49 next week. And so some of it's just like, I don't have any shame. I'm just like, hey, I mean, I'm okay with you saying no. I was listening to this brilliant podcast, Ars Paradoxica. I binged 14 episodes of that podcast in a day. I was at home cleaning house. And I was like, my brain is being bent into a Mobius strip by this show. This is incredible. And so I reached out to Misha, who's one of the producers of the show. And I was like, hey, are you a fan of Young Justice? Because I'd love to have you on the show to talk about conscious creation and layering and all of this stuff that you're doing and plotting ahead of stuff, because you have to do that for the time travel show. And he was like, oh my God, I'm a huge Young Justice fan. Let's do this. And then some other people like chimed in. They were like, I can't believe you just messaged Misha out of the blue and asked him to be on the show. And I'm like, why? What is it going to hurt? I love your show. Do you want to come on my show? I mean, no, I don't really want to do that. Okay, cool. And then just move on. But like, people don't do that. They typically are like, particularly in the podcast industry, a lot of the role-playing game industry and, the audio drama industry, everybody's we're just here enjoying it. We're not making tons of money and doing it. We're doing it because we love it. So why wouldn't we want to come on somebody else's show and talk? Most of us just don't want to stop talking anyway.
Well,
right?
And then it kind of goes back. It's something I learned years back on Twitter. When I first started on Twitter, I thought you waited for someone to talk to you before you talked. And
right.
It's like, but this doesn't work. It wasn't like MySpace where you start with Tom and then everybody's adding you.
Right.
So I can't remember the name of the movie, and I feel really bad because it's like a stupid American culture teenager thing.
Right.
With this really kind of quirky main character, like really goofy dude. But one of the things that sticks out, and I kind of sort of apply it to Twitter, but maybe you don't go out and find the biggest, baddest guy in the school and punch him in the face in front of everyone.
Right.
No, you don't punch him. You go to the biggest, baddest person and you talk to them like they're your best friend, like you've known each other.
Yeah.
Because people share a lot of their vulnerable stuff, and maybe not 100% of themselves, but you share vulnerable things on Twitter, and that's how you make friends there.
Yeah. And Twitter's been huge. Like, Facebook was fine, but like when I moved to Twitter, it changed pretty much everything, because the culture there is a little bit different. And I set up my filters and I'm good with those, and they've worked pretty well for me for the stuff I don't want to see. But it's been incredible. Like, literally, Descent into Midnight and Whelmed would not exist without social media and people being on there and me just going and talking. Like, and just talk. And you know what? And we talk about this all the time on the show. Look, people have no qualms about going on the internet and telling some creator they hate their stuff.
Yeah.
Right. But people have much less, they have much less energy or much less ability or skill or training to be able to go on and just say like, hey, I just read this book and this book was really powerful for me and I really enjoyed it, and tag the writer.
I think part of that is review culture and customer service culture and how we treat customer service industry. How often do we go up and tell people, hey, you did a great job, versus how often do we say, oh, that was terrible?
I've trained myself to do this all the time now, because to me, it just makes everything better around me, which makes my world better. I was standing at like a deli line. I was on a lunch break at work between a bunch of patients. I'm standing at this deli line and I looked over and there's a guy standing next to me and he had this shirt on and it looked really good. And I kept looking at it. Like a couple of times I looked over and I was like, that guy looks really good in that shirt. And I was like, yeah. It's like, excuse me. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, that shirt looks really good on you. And he was like, oh, thank you. Like I was really worried about this shirt. And he just told me the story about buying the shirt and how stressed he was about it. He was like, that means a lot to me. Thank you. And I'm like, you're really welcome. And that was it. That's all the interaction had to be. But that guy carried that energy with him the rest of the day.
Oh yeah.
And it doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to be strange. You could just be like, hey man, hey, I saw you do that nice thing for that person. That was really cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
And that's all you got to do. You don't need to make it more than it is. But it's the same thing on Twitter. I mean, I'm now friends with people that I would have been intimidated to talk to in person. And now I'm friends with them because on Twitter, I was able to say like, you know, hey, I binged 14 episodes of your podcast today. Holy crap. What a great podcast you have. Thank you so much. And, you know, you brought me joy. Thank you so much. That's really all you got to say. Yeah. But people don't want to feel weird, or if they like something, they assume the creator knows that people like it. And so they don't want to be like just another person saying they like it. But
oh God,
it's pretty rare that people tell them they like it.
I was going to say, that's kind of like with artists. You know, people assume artists know how good their stuff is. And it's like, we're oblivious.
Yeah, but
we have no idea.
We're all our worst editors, right? We're all our worst critics. And you know, somebody not having a great day. I mean, people have done that to me. You know, they've been like, "Hey, I just heard your Get Hype podcast talking about the ocean, and it just made my day. It was just so joyful and exciting and happy, and it just made me feel really good. And I was having a bad day. Thank you for going on. You just entirely changed the energy of my day." Yeah. I know that something I did affected somebody in a positive way. That's all you have to say.
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, and that's what we feel. That's how we do Whelmed as well. Like we critique things on Whelmed. There's no problem. There's no reason you can't critique something and critique something positively. You can't critique something. You can't be critical of something and not be a jerk about it. Like we talk about it and like, this didn't work for me. And this is a way I think it might have worked better if they chose to do that, but they didn't. And that's fine. But this is what I was saying about this thing.
Yeah.
And if you're not critical about it, then if we're not critical about those things, then really we're not being critical. You know what I mean? Like we talk about what works and why things work, but we also have to kind of talk about the few things that don't work that great too. Yeah. So, you know, and it's the same thing with other work. I mean, I've also been, you know, alpha reader on a bunch of novels from people I knew because I had been trying to be a novelist before I was doing game design stuff. Ended up finding out I was a much better editor. Well, I'm a good writer, but like I'm a good editor and I love editing. And if you don't tell people what works and you only tell people like, okay, I read your novel. This didn't work. This didn't work. This didn't work. You need to change these things. Okay, great. Well, what happens when they change the thing that really worked to fix the thing you told them didn't work?
Yeah, because you didn't tell them.
That's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right. But if you tell them like, dude, this right here, this is where you live. This thing you did in this chapter, this is the thing that I don't read anywhere else. Don't change this. Lean into this hard. Also, these two characters are both doing the same thing. You got to get rid of one of them or merge them together or do something, right? But don't change this. Please live here, right? That helps somebody go like, oh, okay, got it. Now I know that there are things that are working and that it's worth continuing to go on and do. But also, yeah, okay, I got to change these other things now. But if you only focus on the critical and you only focus on the negative, it's kind of hard to feel like you're doing anything right sometimes. And that might, I fully accept that may just be me and that other people might be fine with that. but it's not how I choose to edit when I'm editing other people's work.
Yeah.
I want them to know what works and also what I think might be able to be improved and why. And then they can make the decision. Yeah.
Those are all really, really good points and really strong things. And I think I've heard that a couple places with other things. It's just generally, if you're gonna give critique, find something that's good and tell them, hey, but this is what's really well, and this is something you could maybe use to improve upon. So
yeah,
I think we're about. So, we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff, and it's been amazing. So, with the Young Justice Files, what would you do differently if you could go back to the beginning and start over?
The only thing I can think of is I do not like our first episode. And here's the deal. People love that episode. They think it's great. I had what I wanted, what I was envisioning in my head, literally started in like episode 2. We were all over the map in that first episode. Like, we were not following the outline. We were stepping on each other's lines. It was just, I was like, oh God, I can't even listen to it. And other people are like, what are you talking about? That episode was great. And I'm like, I'm so glad you guys loved it. I'm so glad that people enjoy the episode. I don't know what it is. Outside of that, we spent 6 months prepping this show. We've got original music. We got all of the material we had. We were 14 episodes ahead in the can before we started airing. We had our outlines hammered out, exactly what we wanted to do. It was a real solid vision of what we wanted the show to be, and it pretty much hit the ground running. I think every change we've wanted to make, we made. So we had different segments. We didn't have audio triggers for each segment in the first episode. We joked about it in a couple of episodes, and then we ended up taking clips from the show and using them as audio triggers pretty quickly. That was a change that we made. And then we did other little changes, like just the way that where we put certain things. Our spoiler section we ended up putting at the end, and it wasn't always there. We have a fan service section where we talk about the fans and their artwork and all the creative stuff that the fans have done to really boost the signal on that stuff. That used to be at the very end, but we realized some people might be skipping the spoiler section and therefore missing the fan service we there. Mm-hmm. But all that stuff's been implemented now. And to be perfectly honest, it's exactly the way I want it to be. It's exactly the way I want it to be.
It sounds like a bit of work there. Yeah. I think as creators, it is very common that the first thing we sit there and we're like, we see every flaw. We see every flaw, and everyone's like, no, it's great. And I think part of it is those flaws make it more organic and relatable to a way, you know. Yeah. And it's not saying that the flaws all go away, but it's just that first one, there's no escaping it. It's gonna happen.
And the other thing is, I didn't have a studio. I didn't have any place to record. For a bunch of those early episodes, I was riding my bike over to San Diego State and going to the library into one of the study rooms, which is super echoey. And, you know, just so I could get a space because my wife was home, you know, and so I needed to have a quiet spot. We didn't have what I've got set up now. Like, I mean, having a studio, that'd be great, but I don't have a studio now. You know, I've got whatever I can make. And, you know, so those kinds of changes, but I know that there was no way I could have had them. I did the best I could with what I had with that. But as far as the podcast is concerned and how it's set up and laid out and that kind of stuff, then no, I don't think I'd change anything.
I think the coolest studio I've seen so far, because it's innovative and I never would have thought of it, is a sauna.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Automatic soundproof, because
I know.
Yeah.
Some people have some good setups, and I'm a little envious. But down the line, you know, we don't make a lot of money with any of this. We do have a Patreon for Whelmed, and I make some money off of the, you know, drive-through RPG stuff, but mostly that's money just to, you know, pay for a new mic here and there and help us with, you know, getting to cons and, you know, that kind of stuff. That's really basically what it is. It's not like we're making a lot of overhead to be able to set up soundproofing in studios. So, you know, it's the way it is. But yeah. So no, I don't think I'd change anything about it.
Yeah. So, you've mentioned before that you've got articles on tribality and you got involved with that. What is your favorite article there, and why should we go check that out?
Well, I mentioned the one that has been the most popular, which is the Writer's Guide to Role Playing. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if that's my favorite. I think the one that I think I would like to see people do more, or particularly for D&D 5th edition, which are the ones I did mention a little bit earlier. I have 2 full campaign outlines. So what I did was I did a bunch of series of articles breaking down the monsters from the monster manual from CR rating 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15. And talked about the ones that could be used in aquatically, things that you don't sometimes think about, like constructs and undead and things like that. And I actually put encounter seeds of ideas in there for each of these things, each of these categories as well. So you can just go there and get ideas for an underwater adventure very quickly. Some of these things not very typical, right, that you'd think of for underwater. And then when I got to the higher CR ratings, there aren't that many monsters. And so what I ended up doing was I went back and I looked at the encounter seeds and I showed you how you can connect the dots with the encounter seeds that I had put in and made 2 full campaign outlines that talked about how you start with various things for entirely underwater aquatic adventuring. And it's not that different. Particularly if you're using Theater of the Mind, it really is not that different from running a game on the surface. But everything feels fresh and new. And so I really feel like I think it would be helpful for people. People have tagged me all the time on the various D&D groups on Facebook about, getting ideas for, I don't know how to run an aquatic adventure. I'm like, well, here's a whole campaign. Like, pick one, pick an adventure and just do one game and see how it turns out and see how you enjoy it. So I think that's one that I think I'd like to see get some more use, because I just think it would have been incredibly helpful for me, because I would have loved to have had the time to be able to get ideas about how to run something unique that people haven't seen much of. But I think there's 60 or 70 articles on From the Depths about a wide range of stuff that I would love people to go check out and see if they can get inspired. And it's not just about fantasy and not just about D&D either. I talk a lot about science fiction as well and various other systems.
Okay, really, really cool there. What advice would you give to someone who is just starting in tabletop role-playing games?
Just gaming around the table. Not like podcasting, right? Not like trying to do an actual play.
Yeah. Just in general, just starting out, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to get a group together. We're going to play this game.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Gosh, I've gotten this question a lot. And one of the things that I think I would really like to see more people do, and it has less to do with the new player and more to do with the people who are inviting the new player to join them, is to let that new player do interesting things. Mm-hmm. Let that player not have to worry so much about the number crunching, and let them experience the game before they know the game. Does that make sense? Like, get at the table and understand, and let them be part of the story. Tell the story. They don't get they may not get the mechanics right off the bat, or they may be too worried about the mechanics right off the bat. They may end up being a number crunching, player. They may end up wanting to, add, multiply, and divide by fractions playing champions back in the day. Like, they may be really into that, but they might not be. They can't know everything right to start at the table. So for the beginning player, just try and think of the fun, interesting things and participate as well as you can. But for the other people that are sitting around the table with them, encourage them and be there for them and encourage them to be in that space and give them the opportunities and let them have the spotlight sometimes and show them through your actions what it's like to be a good group cooperative storyteller.
Definitely a thing where it takes a little bit of time to learn how to tell a story together. It's
right. I hear so many stories of like, well, I spent all this time making this character, and then turns out that I didn't spec my AC enough, and I got killed by a kobold, and then I was told I had to sit out the whole night. And I was just like, who does that? Why would you do that to a new player? Do you want them to be there? If you don't want them to be there, then don't invite them to the game. Like, don't do that to somebody. Like, you give them an NPC to play. Like, in the moment, say like, oh, you know what? Let's trade this feat for this feat, and that would help you, and that'll be more reasonable. And then, now and now they know, and like scaffold the education. Why in the world would you punish them in the first like 15 minutes of a game? It makes me literally angry.
I think I experienced that once, and it wasn't me as a player. It was in a group. And it was because this player was dead set on doing stuff that just made absolutely no sense. And the DM didn't make them sit out. It was like, okay, you're going to write up a new character.
Yeah. There's a difference between someone who is just trying to, be chaos personified in a game because they're blowing off steam from work or whatever. That's a different kind of player.
Yeah.
Do a one-on-one game with that person for a while. Let them get that out of their system. I've played with those people. I get it. You got to figure it out. I understand. But that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about like somebody who's just really interested in the game and really wanted to learn how to play the game and spent 3 hours making a character and being really excited about this character, to have them die in the first 15 minutes because of a stupid math error.
Yeah.
Yeah. Come on.
Especially with something that can be so confusing. First campaign, we'd been playing a good year before we figured out I was mathing everything wrong. And he's like,
Oh.
I was wondering what was going on with this deck. I thought maybe your rolls were truly, truly that low. And I'm like, I mean, most of them were pretty kind of average. When I had a nat 1, everybody knew. And he's like, yeah, no. And it's like, but I mean, I rolled a couple 20s, and he's like, yeah, those were kind of.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
People were. Did you see Stranger Things?
No.
Oh, okay.
Time slot just.
That's fine. So, but in Stranger Things, these kids are in the 80s. They're literally playing Dungeons and Dragons, and they roll it to hit with a D20 on a fireball, right? And so a bunch of people were like, "That's not how you do a fireball." And I'm like, "You didn't play in the 80s, because in the 80s, playing the game wrong was playing the game. We didn't have anybody to teach us how to play this game, and this game was actually really confusing." Like, honestly, I know I rolled 2d8s for that sleep spell. It should have been 44s. I'm absolutely sure somebody at the table was like, "Oh, it's like 2 to 16, I think. Here, roll 2d8s," and gave them to me. Like, nobody cares, right? It's not breaking the game when you're doing that. And so it's okay to play the game wrong while you're figuring it out. I think people have, and this is a whole life lesson. This is a lesson I'm teaching my kids. You don't learn from doing everything perfectly. You don't. It's another thing that I love about PBTA games. When you roll low, you get experience. And that rolling low doesn't mean that you fail doing what you're doing. It just means the GM gets to tell you what happens. And one of my favorite things to do is to give people everything they had wanted and then regret having asked for it in the first place. Like, it's like, "Oh, I want to punch the Hulk. Okay, great. Oh, I rolled a 6. I rolled a 4. Oh, okay." He's like, "I guess I missed." And I'm like, "No, you hit him really good. Oh man, you knock him out of the park and right into a bus full of kids." And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, next time maybe you want to look around or like check your surroundings, or whatever it happens to be. Like, I want them to feel, because that's a narratively interesting story. That's something that they need to think about, that drives role playing after the encounter.
Oh, that is so harsh.
Well, and it might not be a busload of kids. I'm exaggerating for now, but it would be personalized. But the thing mechanically in the game, it's called failing forward. And when you do that, you gain potential in masks or experience in Dungeon World or Harmony in our game, because you're going to learn. You're going to learn to look at your surroundings. You're going to learn that, I can punch the Hulk into next week, but there are consequences to that, and I need to pay attention to that. That's how you learn. It's a thing that bugged me in role-playing games since the very beginning, about how you only gain experience points based on success. No. And I'm like, that's not how people learn, actually.
No. XP? No. Milestone? Yes.
Yes. I'm a milestone person too.
Memorable moment. Yes.
Exactly. Big storytelling moments. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think another direction with that can also be that it doesn't necessarily have to be something bad. Sometimes it can be something absolutely hilarious, and it's great to have that sometimes, to break the tension, to get them to snap out and realize but it is still a game.
Right. But something that's memorable, right, in some way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If they're talking about it weeks later and you've played since, right. you did it. Yes.
Exactly.
So, who or what inspired you to start writing tabletop role-playing stuff?
Oh, okay. That's a story. So as I mentioned, I'd been working on being a novelist. So I've been writing since college, and writing a lot of short stories and that kind of stuff. And my girlfriend at the time, we were talking about ideas. She was like, are you going to write a novel? Do you want to write a novel? And I was like, I'm not sure what to write it about. And then we talked about some ideas, and I got one that I loved and started running with it, and worked on it for 4 or 5 years. But I also started going to conferences. So I'd go to Southern California Writers Conference here in San Diego. World Fantasy Convention came through one year into San Diego right about the time I was doing this. And I was like, well, it's just literally down the hill from me, and it's World Fantasy. Like, I'll go. I ended up meeting Todd Lockwood, who is a fantastic guy, who is one of the majority of the artists for the 3rd edition Monster Manual that redefined how all those monsters look these days. is incredible with his dragons and whatnot. Met him because he was writing a young adult novel. I didn't know who he was. We were talking about young adult novel stuff, and then I found out he did all this art for D&D third edition. But I went to I think it was Toronto. Another World Fantasy the next year was in Toronto, and Todd and I went. And I was standing in a room with James Sutter, who's one of the editors for Paizo, who apparently goes to these all the time because he's also a novelist. And I was standing in the room. I just happened to be standing in the room near him. And somebody asked him, "Where do you get writers for Paizo?" And he just looked at the guy and went, "Here." Places like this. This is where we get writers. I mean, yes, I'm here for a novelist, but of course, this is where I'm going to get it. Never occurred to me, never once occurred to me that I was doing all of this writing my whole life, and never occurred to me to cross the streams between writing and role playing until that moment. And I was like, what? And then I freaked out, because then I was like, oh, I don't want to do this, because I don't want to do this thing that I've loved for 3 decades and to have people tell me I suck. That would be heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so I had to face that fear. And I came back from that conference, and I ended up backing a Kickstarter that was run by a woman named Christina Stiles, who works for Misfit Studios and had worked for Rogue Genius Games with Owen Stevens and a bunch of other stuff. And Christina Stiles Presents, she had a book that she was doing for Pathfinder in 3.5 called Bite Me, the players, the Pathfinders, the Gamer's Guide to Lycanthropes, I think. Mm-hmm. Well, I played Werewolf the Apocalypse for years and loved it. I have a big thing about shapeshifters and lycanthropy. It's a very spiritual thing for me as well. And I was like, okay. And there was a level that you could back that you could contribute to the piece. And so I talked it over with my wife, and she agreed. And so I backed it at that level. But in addition to that level, Christina would basically help you for the next year, help you get some of your own work published. So I worked on the Guide to the Lycanthropes. And then she said, "What else do you got?" And I was like, "I have this," which was a piece that I did called Mundane No More, Texts and Tomes. And it was a whole piece for third edition talking about mundane texts and the benefits of them. Like, we had people go into a whole library and look for the one magical book and then leave everything else behind. And as a writer and a scholar, like, that drives me insane. So I did a whole series, a whole piece that was based on how do you add mundane books to your world that are worth something and to help, right? That are non-magical.
I mean, poisoning. That's not magical. You gotta study for that. There we go with that mindset. Sorry.
It's okay. I had started writing this article up for my website, and she said, and she saw what I would write, and she said, "Take it off your website. We're publishing this." And I ended up getting a 5-star and seal of approval from Zeitgeist, who's one of the major reviewers in the industry, off that one piece. I was floored. He loved it, and it was incredible to me. I did a couple of sequels to those, and then I started doing some other stuff. I did some editing for some stuff for Rogue Genius Games and Misfit Studios. Then I did a bunch of series stuff on Witches and Warlocks with Robert Hudson and Tim Brannon. I just started doing a bunch of stuff, and Christina just introduced me to a bunch of people. Pretty quickly, my superpower kicked in. And so I'd meet someone and meet someone and meet someone. I worked on Southern Heroes for Cobalt Press, converting that into 5th edition. It was one of the very first OGL 5th edition things. So for me, it was hard. It was a lot of pressure, because originally that was going to be published for a website. Mm-hmm. So I was just converting it in a way from Pathfinder into 5th edition, just to present it as something to go on a website. But they apparently decided to print it. But my layout wasn't as good as it could have been for 5th edition. Yeah. And again, it was one of the first OGL things that came out. The artwork was beautiful and stunning, but the way that I presented the information was more like an article than it was there. So that got revamped by another writer, and it looks gorgeous now. So big credit to them as well. But it was great work. And Dan Dillon, who now writes for WotC, was my editor on that project. And he was brilliant editor, brilliant writer and designer. He's written for Tome of Beasts and all kinds of stuff. He's incredible. And that's where we met. And so I just kept meeting people, and my superpower kicked in. I can't thank Christina enough for getting me started and being, willing to do this, and my wife for, being willing to let me back this Kickstarter at, hundreds of dollars a level that we may not have had at the time.
Yeah.
So
that's, yeah.
I tell people I bought my way in.
I mean, kind of, sort of.
Yeah. Kickstarters will do that. Yeah.
That's a good thing to keep in mind, given backing and stuff. So, what kind of things do you do to prepare yourself both as a player and a character before a game, before a session?
If I'm playing or running?
Both.
Both?
Because I think that looks different, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, it's hard. Like most of these questions I think of in a D&D terms, but I do play D&D now, but a lot of what I do is powered by Apocalypse now, either Masks or Descent into Midnight. Mm-hmm. There's zero prep. So I might go in thinking I want to play a particular playbook if it's available, but I will switch that playbook if everybody's playing something else and I'm feeling a different dynamic for the group. I've always been that person. It's like, what's everybody else playing?
Right.
Okay, I'll play the thing you're not playing. Or like, I love playing clerics. I love playing bards. I love playing support classes. I'm in for playing the druid and the cleric in the support classes, and nobody else is. And I love that. That's who I am. So
even on the emotional end, because I mean, it's my understanding, especially with Descent into Midnight, that it does tug on that.
Mm-hmm.
No,
exactly.
No prep there, just going in. Ooh.
and species like in Descent into Midnight, you're literally creating the world and the culture and the metropolis that you're living in the time. The game I'm running right now, there's this thing that I'd never heard of. It's these Japanese moss balls that like float in water, and this thing is miles and miles huge and floats in the center of the open ocean, like not at the surface, like underwater, and just floats by itself and is filled with all of these tunnels and this huge teeming high-tech metropolis. I can't make that stuff up, right? That the players have created. There's just too many of these incredible stories people have made. So no prep as much, but if we're talking about a game like D&D or something where there's character generation, usually I think about the story that I want to tell with a character or the arc that I want to tell with a character. I like to allow players in, say, D&D to change alignments over time. So it's a sign of growth and change and perspective in the world. I'm a big believer that, Han Solo was not the same character in New Hope as he was in Return of the Jedi. So like if you're not allowing the character to grow, if you create a first level character, if you create a 20th level character in your head, but they're only first level now, and you're just trying to get to that 20th level character and you've already got that pictured, you're railroading yourself. You're not allowing any change or to be affected by the world, to allow you to affect the world and the world to affect you. And to me, that's not that interesting to me. I can play a video game for that, and that's fine. And it's fun, but it's not why I play around a table.
Yeah. Understandable. Yeah. I don't think I've ever personally experienced a game where there was definitely, oh, hey, this is what my character's going to be doing by the end, unless the DM had some plans behind the scenes that we had no idea about. And even at that, I mean, you're dealing with players there. What do players do? We all do it. We sit there, we see your plan, and we say, no, we're going this way.
And that, to me, that's a player's job too. Like, if you're saying like, well, the stereotypical, my character wouldn't do this. Okay. And if we're talking about like murder somebody, okay, maybe that's a conversation to be had between the characters. But if you're talking about like, I wouldn't go on this adventure, make a different character.
Yeah.
Why are you here?
Yeah.
Like, don't make other people, like, it's okay to have an interesting conversation about going on the adventure and like that kind of thing. Do not make the other players figure out the magic bullet that makes you go on the adventure. Make another freaking character.
Yeah. Or like, come up with a reason why this character decided that they are going.
And that's where the interesting thing is when, so I've talked about this a bit on some other podcasts, but one of the last D&D campaigns I played in, I created a lawful good cleric of Poseidon. We didn't have a character generation day And so it ends up that I was playing a lawful good cleric in a party of chaotic neutral, self-mutilating warlocks and necromancers.
Oh no! Is he
I was
there to
all,
save them?
The closest we got was a true neutral halfling fighter with the criminal background. I was like, that's the okay. So so I'm at this table and I had to decide what to do. I was like, am I going to lean into the lawful stupid and tell people how they're living their life wrong? Or am I going to just be my character and try and find the best reasons to be in this? Because there's a threat we had to face, and that was important. What happens if I open my cleric up to the perspectives of other people? Oof. And what ended up happening was this incredible psychological journey for this character. I mean, Poseidon is classically a chaotic neutral god anyway. And in 5th edition, they don't limit what your alignment could be. So his heart was lawful good, and he was drawn to the ocean for some other reasons. He ended up having to murder one of his closest friends because his wife, the friend's wife, had turned into a Penangolin, and she had completely mind wiped his friend into doing terrible things. He tried to stop him. He tried to dispel evil. He tried to talk him out of it. He tried to do all of this stuff, and none of it worked. And he was going to do terrible things. And my character ended up, even the players at the table were like, "Oh my god!" And that was the only choice I felt like the character had at the time. And even the necromancer was just like, "Dude, I've never murdered anybody. You're a terrible human being." And so I ended up going from lawful good into kind of neutral good territory. And then as the time went on with everything that was going on, I slipped to chaotic good. And then I psychologically broke. That character broke and literally walked into the ocean. And I talked to the DM. The campaign ended up fading, but he was like, I had to go do some stuff. He's like, this is perfect. He walks into the ocean. We're going to play for a while. If you can come back like three levels later, and you're going to be chaotic good or chaotic neutral. You're going to have like the crazy old man in the sea beard. You're going to be riding on a megalodon. Like you're going to be owning the chaotic neutral Poseidon. It's like his god wanted him to go on this journey to learn what it means to be a true cleric of Poseidon. It was brilliant. Or I could have stayed lawful good and just done the whole thing where I was telling other people that they should be better in the world. Right. And I'm just like, that's not interesting to me. This other thing ended up being interesting to me,
See, I'm dying to play my first paladin because of the fact that I run one game as DM and I'm in another game in the same world as player. And I made the mistake of taking an item of a character I wanted to play, and now I have this chance that I might actually get to play it in this one that's like 5,000 years previous to the one I run.
Oh, interesting.
So I've already written her death, and I'm like, all right, I don't know what the journey looks like. But I know it's one of those moments with what we've written. It's a fade to black thing when she goes. And then there's a good 5,000 years before my players come across her and her artifacts, which they have came across, they have experienced, and they're like,
"Oh, see, I love that."
And they already know she's one of the big arcs because, you don't have a villain disappear if they're not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
yeah. Love it.
She's, but when she starts, she's a paladin of Palor of all things. So
love it.
We can guess where that'll go. I can't wait to actually experience it.
It goes very well, obviously.
Oh yeah.
It goes well for everybody.
Oh yeah. So within the tabletop community, what has your experience been? What do you think has been good? And what do you think could improve?
Oh, classic question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been great to me. I'm a cishet white guy. I can pass as a grognard. I can pass as a newbie. I can talk to pretty much anybody and have people talk to me. My job in the industry, and it has been for a while now, is to shut up and listen to people who have things to say and about what needs to change, and not argue with argue with their experience. My experience has been great, and lots of people have great experiences, but just because you've had great experiences doesn't mean that you may also have terrible experiences. Yeah. Right. And people can say like, yeah, there's this loving group of people that I've met on Twitter personally that have been incredibly supportive of me, and they would say the same thing of others. They also have stories that are like, what the heck, guys? So making things, we talk about inclusivity or equality in gaming. It's just like, what, let's just let people play, like come in and let people play the game and experience the game and enjoy the game, and understand that your words have power, and that what you say and what you express matter, and maybe check it, maybe not just let stuff fall out of your mouth without thinking about it. Or we all make mistakes. Say something, do something. I certainly have in my past. I didn't get here I wasn't born like this. I made all kinds of terrible mistakes in my life that I've learned from and said, geez, what was I thinking? Don't do that again. Please don't do that again. So yeah, there's lots of things that we can do. I think to make things better and more inclusive, from everything from just encouraging new players at a table and not killing them with a kobold in the first 5 minutes, to really just listening and hearing new perspectives and new ideas and new experiences. That's the whole point of me bringing up aquatic gaming in the first place. Yeah. Right? Like, for me, I want to hear like Asians represent. That podcast is fantastic. Like I want to hear these new perspectives. I want to see games written by people with different experiences and ideas and cultures than me. Like it just makes everything better. Why wouldn't we do that? So I guess that's my opinion. So
I think it's one that a fair amount of people share, though, and
I hope it seems to be.
I think the more we open, definitely the more possibilities for really cool or really insane things to happen. Because when you start opening those different avenues, you invite the ability for creatures that maybe wouldn't have ever interacted to have an interaction, and just yes. Anyways.
Absolutely.
Although I'm very much a yes person when it comes to do the crazy thing. So.
Me too.
What is, I think you may have answered this, what is your favorite style of play when it comes to like a tactical or strategic theater of the mind, grids, rule of cool, all the different ways, because there's so many different ways.
I'm definitely a rule cool guy for sure. I've always been trying to figure out what kind of player I am. I talk about like, I'm a storyteller, or I'm like the actor character or whatever. But God, who was it? Phil and Senda, I think, on Pandas Talking Games. They had a category of player they called the Rainmaker. I'm like, that's me. The Rainmaker is someone who sits at a table and says, what's the story the DM's trying to tell? What's the story the other players at the table are trying to tell? I'm going to put myself into their story, and I'm going to welcome them into my story. And we're going to I'm going to help make a better, like not a better story. I'm going to help turn the volume up on the stories that I'm hearing that other people want to tell. That's the kind of player that I am. But as far as like, like I said earlier, I have all kinds of maps and minis, and I love using those, especially with kids. When I'm running for younger kids, having maps and minis is really fun for them because they can really see this thing that's a new experience for them. And I love doing that. But I'm a real theater of the mind kind of person in the end, I think. Even when I'm using a map, fourth edition, it was a tactical game. There was a lot of that in the rules. And I loved fourth edition. I really enjoyed, I ran a 2-year campaign that was fantastic in fourth edition. But even when I'm using a map now, if people can't quite get somewhere, or they're like, oh, I don't know if this fits. And I'm like, it fits. Is that the coolest thing? Yes, great. Then does it matter? Do we need to spend 5 minutes measuring out the size of this spell? No. Let's just move on and get the action going, get cinematic on some of it. It doesn't need to be down to the inch. So yeah, So I guess I'd say I'm theater of the mind, but I really, really enjoy cool minis and dioramas and stuff. It's just so cool.
Well, because they can tell their own story too.
Yeah, exactly. And it can inspire people. Like theater of the mind is interesting because you can do anything, but there's also paralysis through analysis with doing anything. And a map can sometimes inspire you with the way they look, particularly the gorgeous maps that people make these days. Incredible.
Okay, so that sounds, I get that. So I think we're about at the area where we're ready for questions from everyone else. We do have some that have been asked earlier, so we will start with those ones before we get to any in chat. If you're still here hanging out in chat and you have any questions you would like to ask Rich, feel free to do so. We will grab them and throw them in queue as well. So we'll start with a couple that were actually asked on Twitter, and I believe you've seen these from Leviathan Files, also known as Taylor of River House Games, one of your co-creators.
Uh-huh.
What are your top 3 favorite Descent into Midnight playbooks, and why?
I responded to him on Twitter that I do not choose favorite children.
That might be my fault because I did it to him.
All right, so I put some thought into this during the day today, and I think some of my favorites, maybe some of our newer ones. If you're going to make me pick them, Taylor, one of them is called The Seeker, and The Seeker is it's a kind of almost like a spiritualist class, but in Descent into Midnight, the even though they're advanced civilizations, they don't explore outer space. This isn't an outer space game, so the exploration drive is still there in these cultures, just like it is in humans. But that exploration either goes deeper in the ocean, or it goes into other dimensions. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole spiritual, a spirit world, basically, like a physical other dimension that sits behind our own. It's called the Echo in Descent into Midnight. And though psychic powers and things work through the Echo, you if you're telepathic and you send a message to someone, you're really like, it's like picking up your cell phone. You're like sending a message through the Echo, and the Echo goes to somebody else, and it's like you're putting a ripple in the Echo that goes to someone else. Well, most people interact with the Echo that's immediately around the world in which you've created every day, in the same way that we interact with technology, and we just don't know how it works. Well, Seekers not only do that, but they go way past that into what we call the Far Echo, and basically can travel to other dimensions or other worlds. So where astronauts on our world, go to other planets, Seekers are actually they're like psychonauts, right? They're traveling to other dimensions and places and looking through time and interpreting visions and so on and so forth. They're a very spiritualist, shamanistic type of character. And that one sits very close to my heart because that's part of my own personal spirituality. Another one that we created recently is called the Touchstone, and it's based on the Hope stat. And the Touchstone is that character, that beautiful character, that the innocence that sees the beautiful in the grotesque, right? There was somebody that sent me a picture, and it was this girl who was standing on the edge of a cliff, and she's very small in the picture, and she's wearing this like flowing white like nightgown at the edge of this cliff in the darkness. And there's this enormous, like horrifying beast, like standing, like its head is just right in front of hers. And they're just looking at each other in this like moment of peace. I'm like, that's the Touchstone. The Touchstone is like, the heart of a character or group. It's the one who sees the peace in everything, that the violence isn't always the answer. The Touchstone sits with me a lot about how you can create other solutions to problems than violence. There can be violence in Descent into Midnight. We do have a move for that, but it's actually not even a basic move. We make it a special move. And we encourage people to find other solutions. Every playbook has some way to de-escalate violence in some way, form, or fashion. Mm-hmm. It's not required. You can do a game where you're monster hunting. That works too. That's fine. But the standard game is about how to resolve conflicts in ways that don't build more corruption for your community. So the touchstone means a lot to me. And then another one that I really like is called The Specialist, and it's also one of our newest ones. And it's actually the playbook itself is a playbook that's designed to get into and out of difficult situations. But when I designed the concept for that, all these concepts came from me. And then what I do is I write down a bunch of basic moves and things that I think represent the idea of the playbook. And then Taylor comes in with his PBTA expertise, sees the idea, the through line that I'm building, and goes, I see what you're doing here. Let me add more ideas along this theme. Mm-hmm. And the specialist is, to me, there's lots of things they can do, but to me, they're a rescue specialist. They're like a field medic. They're someone who goes into dangerous situations and rescues and pulls people out of those dangerous situations. You can also play it like a hacker or a cat burglar or other ways that you can play this playbook. But to me, the emphasis of play that I would do with the specialist is to be the ability to get in to help people in places that other people can't get into. And so I think if I have to pick three, I think those are the three that matter to me right now. Though I love them all. I'm like Taylor. They're like I love every playbook. I'll play them all.
Yeah. I think that was the whole point behind the question is, no, you have to choose. Even if it's something that changes.
I'll make him pay later.
Right now. What episode of the Wait. Let's try that again. What episode of the YJ Files are you most proud of?
Another child question. I'm
just the messenger.
I know. It's so tough. We have whatever 186 episodes. The one I'm most proud of, I guess if I need to pick one, I'm going to pick two because we have different kinds of episodes. Mm-hmm. We have the discussion episode with Crispin Freeman. It was our first discussion or interview with a voice actor. Mm-hmm. It also just happens that Crispin is a mythology scholar, as I mentioned earlier. We also have very similar spiritual beliefs, turns out. And so we had this fascinating conversation, and I was pretty intimidated because Crispin's a pretty brilliant guy. Turns out we have mutual friends, which I didn't know at the time. And he is a brilliant actor and this mythology scholar. And I got him to come on the show. He doesn't do interviews. When we asked him to come on the show, I didn't know that he doesn't do interviews. So I expected him not to come. Mm-hmm. Turns out he, first of all, wanted to rewatch Young Justice from beginning to end before he came on the show. But the reason he said he wanted to do that is because he listened to the podcast and he said, you guys are doing something I haven't seen, which is you're not talking about this show from just a consumer standpoint. You're talking about it from a creator's standpoint. You're talking about it to inspire other people. He's like, that's something I haven't seen before, and I absolutely want to come onto your podcast. And I think I'm proud of that because the vision that I had got out there. And someone who doesn't do a lot of interviews said, hey, I'm going to make an exception for this podcast because I think they're doing something new. The other episode I think I'm proud of is our season 2 finale, when we were still a year and a half out of getting a season 3. I did a closing statement basically thanking the people who create the show, but I'm really proud of what I wrote there. I really managed to get my feelings for the show and the people and why it matters into that closing statement at the end of that episode. I was really proud of that. I'm also really proud that we got Emily to come on and join us in the second season as well.
That is pretty powerful stuff. And yeah, thank you. It's like a lot of people forget how strong just saying thank you can be. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And then his final one, which I remembered being told that if I ever had you on the show, he would be having me ask this question. What has been your scariest ghost encounter?
My scariest ghost encounter. I've been thinking about this all day. I know I have an emotional memory of some scary ghost encounter, and I could not remember what it was. But Taylor and I, did he talk about the murder basement at Gen Con?
Yes, he did. He shared clips. Somebody shared clips. It was... Woo.
Well,
wow.
This is the second year I get an Airbnb for like 10 or 12 people. And this is another thing that I do, right? Like, I'm like, hey, I'm getting an Airbnb, who wants in? And I invite people I want to hang out with who are in the industry, because it's really hard to get places to stay in Gen Con. And that little bit of help makes it easy for people, right? Well, the year before that, I was sitting in the living room of this Airbnb, and Neil Powell, our producer, opened what I thought was a closet. And I was like, I just looked at him, and he looks at me, and he looks in the closet, and he's all, And then he walks in the closet and closes the door. I was like, what the hell is he doing? And then I was doing something on my phone, and I realized it was like 10 minutes later. And I'm like, he's come out of the closet. And then he comes out of the closet, and he looks at me, and he's like, yeah, that's a murder basement. And then he closes the door. He closes the door and then like walks off. And I'm like, what? And then I think Taylor came over and some other people came over. I was not going in there. And they went downstairs. Turns out that first Airbnb, it was a huge like dirt floor that had like Dexter level like plastic wrap all over the place. And I was just like, what? And so the second year we got another Airbnb, and we were joking. Somebody was like, well, this year we didn't get a murder basement. And we're like, yeah. I like 2 days into the con, Taylor comes and he goes, I found the murder basement. I was like, there's not a murder basement here. He's like, there's a murder basement, and it's right next to your room. I was like, what? And there's a door that opened up, and there was a laundry right there. But if you keep opening the door, there's a hole into the ground. I was like, what? And then you can see the video of Taylor and I going into it. That was horrifying. I did not want to be in it. He ended up running 10 candles down there and like some other stuff. I was like, I am not going down there. Like, I'm not recording audio
we're
down there.
We're taking care of this. We're done. Because
I'm not convinced Taylor himself came out. I am convinced since then he has been possessed.
Are you going to do another Airbnb for Gen Con?
We have an Airbnb. It is not any of the same ones. We're hoping 3 for 3 on the murder basements, but we're not sure yet.
Keep me updated, because that's riveting.
I did see an update from Taylor today that at the con he's currently at with the Airbnb, they also have a murder basement.
Maybe it's Taylor.
If you go to @Leviathan Files, you will see him talking to the other developer, Richard, about that murder basement as we speak. I have not looked at the photos yet. I am terrified. There is something about shoes coming out of the ceiling. I don't know what the situation is. Something about child's Crocs is coming out of the ceiling basement. Yeah, it's just sounds terrible.
If this goes on long enough, I feel you guys could almost do a podcast about Airbnb murder basements.
It's Gen Con Ghost Hunters. It's terrible. I blame Taylor 110% for sure. It's definitely Taylor.
Oh boy. Blake Ryan asked, most RPGs don't have aquatic settings. What do you see as the big draw card for trying out more aquatic stories?
Hey, Blake. First of all, Blake, someone I've interacted with a ton. He's in Australia and also a game designer with a really cool concept for a game. So you should go check out his stuff. So the question was, most settings don't have an aquatic setting. What was the rest of the question there? You cut out a little bit.
What do you see as the big draw card for trying out more aquatic stories?
Oh, it's fresh material. Everything is going to feel new. So the game, when I told you I ran this game the first year I went to Gen Con, and it was for like James and Cap from the One Shot and Jim McClure. When I went on his podcast to talk about it, he was like, we're talking about this game. I was like, oh, okay. And it was an aquatic Edge of the Empire Star Wars game. And he was talking about how they had gone underwater in this aquatic world, and there was a research station that they were at, and he was talking about the physicality of being underwater. He's like, if I'm in space and there's a rupture or something, I kind of understand what that is. Like, but underwater, it's like everything is trying to kill me. Like if there's a problem in this submarine, I will just be crushed, and there is nothing I can do about it. He's like, there is this claustrophobia along with agoraphobia. Like you can see everything everywhere around you, and also you feel like you're in a box. He's like, I was fascinated like by this feeling that I don't get anywhere else. And that wasn't even the adventure. That was just going down to this thing. And I think that's what I'm talking about. Like, it's not just cool monsters and stuff that you can use, because that's really cool too, and that'll be fresh. But like, even just one or two little sensory things that you can share with someone will put them in a mindset that they have not experienced anywhere else. And I think that's important. And there are some games that do really good things about describing that. We're hoping Descent into Midnight be one of them. Another one is a game called Blue Planet. It's a game that came out, award-winning game that came out 20 years ago, a science fiction game that has brilliant descriptions. I mean, it has got some of the best marine biology and marine science I've ever seen in a role-playing game. It's amazing. And after 20 years, they're actually getting a third edition update that's coming out quite soon from Biohazard Games, and I could not be happier. It's a fantastic setting. So not just putting things underwater, but helping people understand how to, the little things you can do just to put a little dot of description to make things feel different.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, think about it. You're on a ship, and say you were to do battle-type encounters, like, where are you gonna run and hide? You can't.
Yeah.
There's a point where you just run out of space. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that could be the case too. And for me, when I say aquatic adventures, I don't really think as much like pirates, because really it's just land adventures. You're just going from place to place to different islands, right? When I say aquatic adventures, I mean under the surface all the time, 24/7. Like I'm saying, like buy in, get down there, live in that civilization, see how it's different. That's the alien thing that people are just like, what is that? What does that even look like? Right? Yeah.
One might argue that adventures that are top of the sea but are kind of more like Moby Dick type stories.
Right. Yeah.
That's not really destination, because the destination is in the sea in that case.
Yeah, and it depends. I mean, you can absolutely handle it that way. Yeah, for sure. There are different ways to do those kinds of games, for sure. Yeah, and I've been on podcasts talking about that as well, about voyage campaigns and what you can do with those, which can be really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's something, as people become more aware of other ways to play and other settings to play and other, oh, hey, what about actually playing in the sea? We'll start seeing really different and crazy things start happening, and that'll be awesome.
Yeah.
So, Darth Torlin has asked, do you like physical dice? If so, how many dice do you have in your collection?
I do like physical dice. I am not a dice aficionado. I get dice, and then some of this dice that I've had, I have a set of dice. I don't use them anymore because they're so worn out, but I have this original set of dice from my D&D box set from 1980. And back then they were all crappy molded plastic and rolled on the edges, and you had to like take a crayon and color them in, color in where the numbers were. Can't use them anymore, but I have them. So most of the sets of dice that I have some kind of emotional connection to them. And I do like physical dice. But what I will say is that I use physical dice when I'm at a table with other people. If I'm gaming online, I find that for some reason I end up using like a dice roller on my phone or something. There's something about the act of rolling the dice with other people where they can all see the results with me and share that experience that I really, really like, that I don't, I guess, need when I'm online. I found that I just realized that recently when I was running a D&D game online. And I was like, why don't I want to go run and get my dice? And I think that's what it is. I think I want to share that experience with someone. more than anything else.
Could that be part of the thing with online games when cameras are shared? It is usually, oh, hey, faces, we're not sharing dice boxes to show the show rolls and be like, yo, this is what just happened here. You
right.
know? So
and the people I tend to play with, I curate my games a lot anyway. It's not like I'm playing with random people. I trust them with their roles and they trust me with my roles. And, so it's not that big of a deal to have it, but it can be pretty exciting, of course, when you're rolling those dice in front of other people. You know what I mean? If I'm sitting at a table, I actually want to see other people's dice. I hope people don't use dice rollers, but I wouldn't get real picky about it. If people want to use it, that's fine. But.
See, I like showing off dice when I can too, so I get that. Shoot, I had more dice show up today, and we'll talk about what those are all for, because those are for stuff. They are for things. 2 of them are. 2 sets are. So, anyways, okay. So, Beth Torlin had another one. Do you have any favorite water animal here on Earth?
Oh, favorite aquatic animal on Earth?
Mm-hmm.
Why is everybody making me pick my children? I think, just off the top of my head, I would have to say marine mammals because of the alienness of them and my fascination with them with studies. But everybody knows about them, so I want people to go look at something interesting. I want people to go look up a fish called a barrel eye. The barrel eye has a domed head that is clear like a window, and their eyes are inside their skull and look out like a cockpit inside its skull. Go look up a picture of a barrel eye.
That's spelt like the stone, right?
And we'll go with that. Yep, barrel eye. Yeah.
Okay.
There it is.
Awesome. I think I've seen something like that.
They're fascinating. Or go watch Blue Planet 2. Just the whole season. It'll blow your mind.
Okay. TVM Rock asked, has it already been asked earlier, which I don't think it had, what other aquatic games do you enjoy? It's like ones that might have influenced your game.
Oh, that's a really good question. The Blue Planet is a huge influence. Mostly because Blue Planet, it used science in a way I'd not seen in a role-playing game at the time. It used science to inspire an incredible world. So some people think like, well, I don't want to be limited by the limitations of science in a science fiction game. Okay, well, but knowing your science and knowing what your science is can help you make something that you can't even imagine, because truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things,
science, honestly, widens horizons. I've never seen science take something and say, okay, it is most definitely this. It's like, well, it could be this, but also this, that, the other, and oh, this thing that you think is totally not related, definitely that.
Absolutely related. So one of the things, for example, that they did, so in Blue Planet, the setting is basically there was an ecologic disaster on Earth. We explored the solar system. At the edge of the solar system, we found a stable wormhole. We sent explorers through that stable wormhole and found out the other end of that wormhole opened up on a planet that was very much like Earth, but it was 90% covered in water. We started to colonize that planet when the ecological disaster happened. And so none of the supply ships came back to the planet to help out. And so Earth just assumed the colony died. And then like 100 years later, Earth had recovered. They decided, okay, well, let's go back through this wormhole and check out this planet again. Now that all of our colonists, the original colonists, are dead. When they got back there, they find the original colonists didn't die. They went native and live there now.
Oh, man, that sounds kind of like Subnautica.
Oh, maybe. I haven't played Subnautica yet, but I've heard great things about it.
That has not helped with my don't touch the ocean thing.
Right. Anyway, one of the things is the animals that developed on this planet. One of the things that happened on Earth is that, strangely enough, the development of compound eyes like we have, or that like octopuses have, is actually pretty weird. It's a weird development in evolution. And so on that planet, on Poseidon, the development of complex eyes never happened. So every animal has eye spots. There are no eyes. But there are animals that look analogous to things that we know. There's something called a stick monkey on Poseidon that looks like a primate to an extent. But imagine like walking up to a primate whose back's to you and having it turn its head around and have it have no eyes and only eye spots. Like the human nature is so drawn to eyes. Like this simple idea in science made a world that is familiar but horrifyingly different with just that one little twist of an evolutionary button. So the way that Jeff Barber and the team talked about science and the inspiration about what that is kind of, it was a big inspiration for Descent into Midnight, even though Blue Planet was a classic 90s simulationist game and our game is a heavy storytelling game. Doesn't matter. It's this idea of how can we have people use the science they know to inspire them to tell a story. Oh, yeah. As far as video games are concerned, there's a game that I played that was amazing with my kids, and it's called, God, what's it called? I want to say Azul, Azul. And it is a beautiful aquatic game where you are playing this diver on an alien world, is what it looks like. And you do this exploration. It's entirely underwater the whole time. It is absolutely stunning and beautiful. It's not very long. Unfortunately, it's not very long, but the story is stunning. The exploration is stunning. I played it on the Xbox, but I think there's versions for PlayStation and everything else. Go find that game. It is... I just play it to relax and meditate before I go to bed. It's amazing.
TBM Rock has updated. He says that the game is Abzu.
Abzu. Thank you so much. That is it. Abzu. Oh God, it's so good. Yeah. And I've heard good things about Subnautica as well, but I haven't played Subnautica yet.
And Blake has dropped the link for on Steam. So you guys have heard, make sure you grab it. It's on the Steam store.
Thank you, Blake. Well done.
Good jobs. Yay. Oops. I only wanted the link, thank you. Not my entire chat. No. Okay. And then, let's see. David Palladian asked, do you have a particular narrative archetype that your characters gravitate towards?
Interesting. That's a great question. A narrative archetype. Wow. I want to put a lot of thought into that question. But I think simply the idea of starting in one place and ending in another. So we talked about that earlier about emotional growth. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have a particular trope I could draw on, but I like to see my characters change. Even if I feel like I only know the character in a particular way, I want to let the world change them and see where they end up. I don't want to know because I don't know where I'm going to end up. And
I don't think anybody knows.
I didn't know when I was 20, and I'm ending up in a whole different, amazing place. So sometimes when you let go of that control, it goes into a new place. So I think just allowing character growth and change is very important to me. But as far as tropes are concerned, an evil turning good, or anti-hero, or something. I don't know if I have anything like that, but I'm going to put thought into it though, because now I'm thinking about it. That was a great question.
Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and take another quick break, and we will be back shortly. that were posted on Twitter. You can always post any questions you have during off weeks on Twitter, and we will see what we can do about getting those answered. So I did not catch name on user. Oops, Balefish. Richard Krutz Laundry asks, how has practicing kindness influenced your game design, podcasting goals, or process?
So Richard Krutz Landry is the other designer on Descent into Midnight, and you guys ask terrible, terrible questions. How does
questions?
They are really good questions, actually. How does practicing kindness affected my game design, podcasting goals? Mm-hmm. I think I wouldn't be anywhere without it. To be honest, I mean, I wouldn't have met Richard. I wouldn't have met Taylor. Yeah. I think it's critical to support other people. When I didn't know what to write for myself, I would listen to somebody else's podcast or I would read someone else's material and I would tweet about it. And I'm not doing it to manipulate someone. I'm not doing it to expect anything back from someone. I'm doing it because I want to share the thing. If I love the thing, why do I not want to let other people buy the thing so the person who created the thing has more money to make more things that I like?
Yeah.
Seems like basic math to me. So, yeah, I mean, that's how all of it is. We wouldn't have had the guests we had on our podcast. I mean, I wouldn't have Neil to even have a podcast for that matter, or Caleb, when Neil stepped in to take over, he took over so much work for us and he's magic. Neil is magic. We say it all the time. But I think being on his podcast on Dungeon Master's Block and him and I becoming friends, I don't know, practice kindness. It's really beneficial for your whole life. It makes you feel better. It makes other people feel better.
Oh yeah.
So if that answers the question.
Yeah, and there are interesting studies on that too. So
yeah,
very interesting ones. They also asked, what advice would you give your kids about pursuing the things they love?
This is a conversation my wife and I have all the time. I want my kids to feel supported in pursuing the things that they love. I want my kids to hear me on podcasts talking about the things that I love and talking about them with passion. I want them to do that. The advice that I would give them is to learn the rules so you can break the rules, and to respect other people's work and listen to other people's work and ideas for you, but do your thing.
Yeah.
I think it's important to listen to feedback. Only listen to the feedback from people that you respect or like or know. You can process what people say. If someone says critically, you can think about it and say, do I really feel like that's true? And if it's not true, then you can just put that away and talk to other people. Yeah. But I think it is really important. Actually, Ken Norris, that marine biologist I was talking about that got me interested in marine biology in the first place, one of the things he told me was, if I had come up with the ideas I had when I first started, people would have thought I was crazy. But instead, I got my PhD in marine biology and I did everything people told me I was supposed to do, and then did the exact same thing with the ideas that I had at the very beginning, and now they think I'm a genius. He's like, learn the rules so you know how to break the rules. It's important to know.
Oh, yeah.
So
you gotta be able to take them apart and say, okay, this is how this bit works and how that bit works. So, yeah, definitely.
Yep.
And then finally, how has writing your own game compared with writing content for other games?
Yeah, writing Descent into Midnight is an absolute dream come true. I couldn't have conceived of this game without Taylor and Richard. I'm the concept lead. These are a lot of ideas that are seeds that have been banging around in my head, but they make them real and they make them better. The whole opening and closing mechanic we have for a game was created by Richard, and it's absolutely a drop of gold. It's brilliance. Taylor's knowledge of PBTA games and knowledge of marine science, and combined with my crazy ideas, every time the whole new corruption mechanic we have and world building mechanic all came from Taylor. All of this stuff, I couldn't have done any of this by myself, but it's coming out to be more than I could possibly imagine. And yeah, I love writing for D&D. I'm was one of the stretch goals for Reach of Titan that just came out, the Kickstarter that just completed. I'm really excited to write for them. but it is writing for somebody else's game. And even though we use PBTA as an engine, this game is very uniquely ours. And it's a whole different world. I don't even know what I'm going to do after this.
So, I think we've got one last one, and then we'll close up questions because it is late for everyone at this point, I believe.
Is it pie or cake?
No, it's from Blake Ryan.
Oh,
and,
Blake. Okay.
All this underwater stuff is great, but don't you really want to make a game about space? It does appear to be a bit tongue-in-cheek there.
I know, Blake. Oh, I could write a game about space and you guys would love it.
I can say I would because it's space.
It would have space whales, but you know.
I mean, space whales are great.
Space whales are great.
Okay.
Love you, Blake.
Awesome. So this has been RPG Unlimited. Thank you so much for being on my show. It's been great having you.
Thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
It was loads. All right. So, with that, if you would like to keep up with Rich and his projects, you can find them at descentintomidnight.com, crashingthemode.com, tribality.com, as well as over on DriveThruRPG. You will want to search him there. It's a lot easier that way. Rich Howard under authors. And then twitter.com/UmbrelWalker, as well as you can support him on Coffee. I do believe he has a link on his Twitter for that. Yep, so be sure to check his link there, his pinned tweet there for that. Other than that, thank you so much, guys, for being with us this time around. We will be live again in 2 weeks with another RPG. Nope, I lied. I gotta do my own shameless plug because there's a reason there isn't any RPG Unlimited in 2 weeks, and that's because I will be on Dragon Talk up in Seattle in 2 weeks. So that's gonna be huge. I don't know what they're doing there, but it's gonna be great. So yeah, you can find my show here on Twitch every other Friday, and then on other platforms, including anchor.fm/RPG Unlimited, on Tuesdays. So, awesome. Thank you so much, guys.